Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Suffered in Different Homes for Peace? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku lost his mother when his father had abandoned them only a few weeks before. Both Izuku and his mother had been abused by him ever since Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless. Even at such a young age, he knew his mother hadn't been taking it well. They both suffered for 2 years under his control, becoming the unwilling participants in his demonstrations of his quirk, fire breathing. But to think that she'd snapped after he'd abandoned them both, only leaving a sloppily written letter in his wake, simply saying, "I'm leaving. Get rid of the brat if you know what's best for you, Inko." Izuku's mother never discarded him though, at least not directly, rather choosing to discard her life and discard him in the process. So in a matter of weeks, he'd lost both of his parents, and was now the government's problem. They almost immediately placed him into a foster home, when they could find one that would take him. But, due to his quirkless status, which was becoming increasingly more rare with each new generation, now with only a few quirkless children speckled across the entire planet, he knew he wouldn't be treated well. The kids at school had begun to torment him, including his former best friend, Kaken, or Katsuki Bakugo, and others he would have considered friends before he'd been told he was quirkless, even though they had been tormenting him already, well before his diagnosis. In fact, the entire class had been somewhat rude to him before he'd been diagnosed, but it escalated severely as soon as he was. While the teachers used to make an effort to stop the other kids, they didn't even attempt it now. They hadn't attempted it even once in the last 2 years. And now he'd have to suffer even more. As soon as Izuku stepped foot into the Igarashi household, he knew he wasn't really wanted. They already had a child there, Tatsuya, who when told he would have to share a room with Izuku, grumbled, "Why do I have to share a room with it? Something as horrid as that shouldn't even be allowed in our house. It's a monster." Izuku just stood there as the older boy practically begged and pleaded for them to kick the quirkless child out. Izuku hoped that his new parents' response would reassure him. It didn't matter if his new brother didn't love him, as long as his new parents loved him he'd be. "Look, Tatsuya. We don't particularly want it either, but the government gives us money as long as we house it. Just deal with it for now, and if it tries anything, it won't be here much longer." His new mother coldly stated, turning her head to glare at the quirkless boy who hunched his shoulders and suddenly seemed to find the ground much more interesting than the conversation between his new foster family. They hadn't been his new foster family for long. Tatsuya had quickly figured out that he could practically blame the weather on Izuku and his parents would believe every word. They'd soon decided that he was much more trouble than he was worth, and when they found that they wouldn't get more money for taking care of him even though he was worthful, quirkless, they gave up on him. It took a while to find a new placement, but finally, they did. And so, after only a few months, a 6-year-old Izuku was going into his second foster home. As soon as Izuku stepped foot in the Tsukamoto household, he wished he was back with the Igarashis. Sure, they all despised him, but at least they actually gave him the minimum amount of attention possible. The Tsukamotos just ignored him completely. There wasn't even another child to talk to, so he was just isolated in his room all day, watching the clock on his wall tick by until it was one of the scheduled times he was allowed out of his tiny prison, either to grab a few pieces of bread or maybe even a whole sandwich if he was lucky, or to go to the bathroom. Only a month into his stay there, however, he accidentally knocked over a vase during one of his outings to the kitchen, and that was the end of that. As soon as Izuku stepped foot in the Mochizuki household, he knew something was wrong. The woman who greeted him at the door seemed nervous. Izuku didn't know why, until later that day, when Yoichi, Shizuka-san's husband, came home. He recognized the smell of alcohol from Hisashi and his eyes widened. He couldn't do this again, not so soon he couldn't. Shizuka-san apologized over and over again to Izuku as she helped him apply some gauze. SH told him how she had always wanted a family of her own, but couldn't conceive, so she decided to adopt. She told him that she knew she shouldn't have adopted while she was still with her husband, but she couldn't wait any longer. She told him that she wanted a child so bad, and that she wasn't going to wait until she had the courage to divorce Yoichi. Izuku wished Shizuka-san had just waited. He loved Shizuka-san, he really did. But if she had only waited a few more months for him, he knew he probably would have been out of whatever other placement he would have had by then, and then he could have stayed with Shizuka-san forever and he would have had a great life with her. But Shizuka-san hadn't waited. And he had to deal with the consequences for it. He sobbed into her chest and she stroked his fluffy green curls. She was attempting to keep a brave smile on her face for the distressed boy, but the way her lip wobbled showed that she was trying not to cry as well. Izuku. It's all right. It's all fine. And no. He'll hurt me again. When you're not here, he'll dash. He won't hurt you again, Izuku. You won't touch you in that way again. I'll protect you. Why you promise, Shur-san? Izuku choked out, unable to manage her full name in his current state. I promise. Shizuka-san hadn't kept her promise. While she was out, the man had gotten to him again. He had attempted to barricade himself in his room, but Yoichi was strong. It wasn't as if a chair in front of a door would stop him from bursting in and getting handsy with Izuku again. So here Izuku was, packing up and sobbing out his goodbyes to Shizuka-san as she wiped away her tears. She had deemed herself unfit to be a parent, horrified that her husband had his way with the young boy once more. Izuku could tell she wanted to scream, cry, and tell him over and over how sorry and guilty she felt. But all she did was hug Izuku and wish him luck. She told him that 4th time's the charm, though he was sure it was meant to be the 3rd, and that his next foster family would be the one. And if it wasn't, she would come for him. As soon as Izuku stepped into the Hayashi household, he realized that Shizuka-san had lied to him once more, at least about the first part. It was all the same. The man was significantly less handsy with Izuku, which he was grateful for, but that relief was soon lost when he realized the woman was abusive towards him as well. He swore that the government was just giving him any placement they could find for the quirkless child, not even bothering to do the minimum amount of background checks when it came to him. Sometimes, they had nice days, where they'd just leave Izuku to his own devices that he liked those days. Most of the time, however, their fathomless rage was let out on Izuku. If either of them had a bad day at work, they'd take it out on him. If either of them had something even remotely bad happen to them, they'd take it out on him. If he even made one mistake, they'd yell and scream at him for what seemed like hours until they were satisfied. And that was the best of it. Most people would deem the abuse to be the worst part, when they'd throw bottles at him and hit him and choke him if he dared to make a peep, but Izuku hated the closet the most. Most normal people would think that it would be a nice break away from all the abuse and screaming, but to Izuku it was just a never-ending darkness that swallowed him up. He was used to the company, whether good or bad, so when it was silent, he couldn't take it. Sure, when the two were at work, he was alone, but he knew when they were coming back. When he was in the closest, it could be a few hours or it could be a few days until he'd see the light again. His classmates didn't question him when he didn't come to school for a few days. The only difference was that they'd be taking out multiple days' worth of aggression onto him. And so would his foster parents, even though they were the ones who had put him into the closet in the first place. After half a year, however, the husband was arrested for drunk driving, and he took the person in the passenger seat, his wife, down with him, saying that she had driven a bit that night too. It was safe to say that Izuku was going to need a new placement. As soon as Izuku entered and exited his next few foster homes, he began to think that no one could ever want him. Shizuka-san wanted him, but he hadn't seen her in the past 4 years. H was worried that Yoichi had done something to her, but he couldn't find out. He decided to risk asking his current set of fosters if they'd heard anything about Shizuka-san, even though every time he'd asked one of his previous set of fosters, it hadn't ended well. He knew that if this went wrong, they would send him to an orphanage. The group homes were already bad enough, but he needed to know if Shizuka-san was okay. He was lucky that they were in a good mood that day, but by the end of their conversation he wished that they had just kept what they knew secret. They told him that a lady had asked about him at the beginning of his time with them, but they told her that he had a permanent placement now. So she took in some other kid. Izuku couldn't believe it. Shizuka-san had come for him, and they had lied to her. Did they feel bad for Shizuka-san? Wanting such a worthless child? Or did they really want him? Nobody ever really wanted him. Shizuka-san never really wanted him. She just thought she did. H was just a burden. So on the eve of his 10th birthday, he decided to free his current foster parents of their burden. As Izuku's worn red trainers scuffed against the dark streets of Mustafu, only being lit by the occasional lamppost, he smiled to himself, gripping the straps of his hole-filled backpack harder. He wouldn't be a burden to anybody if he ran away, but if they had to look for him, then he'd be even more of a burden. He looked up to the rooftops, and an idea popped into his mind. If he died, then they'd be free of both the burden of finding him and the burden of dealing with him. And he'd be free of the burden of life itself. As he climbed up the fire escape of an apartment building, he stood in awe of the view. Sure, a bad area of an industrial city wouldn't seem so fantastic to a normal person, but to the 10-year-old Izuku, or at least he was sure it was his birthday now, it was a glorious sight compared to the pure darkness of the closet or a lone spider lily laying across a slur-covered desk. He stood there for a while, reveling in the cool breeze against his scar-covered skin. He told himself so stop being selfish, and prepared to lean forward and let death envelop him in its grasp, but an ear-piercing scream snapped him back to reality. He jumped off the ledge and back onto the rooftop, running across it to peek into the alley where the fire escape he had climbed up lay. A man with some kind of mutant-type quirk was pinning a woman to the wall. Izuku knew what this was. He'd known what this was since he was 7. He couldn't let another person suffer like he did. He quietly and carefully slid down one of the ladders of the fire escape, now positioned a few feet above the man. He jumped off the fire escape and kicked the man in the head, knocking him out almost immediately. The woman was frozen in fear but soon realized that she was safe. She thanked the boy profusely, who just shrugged and mumbled out an apology. The woman looked at him in confusion, not knowing why the mystery boy was apologizing, but before she could ask, a raven-haired man with a gray scarf around his neck rounded the corner. Izuku's eyes widened. Eraserhead. A pro-hero. A pro that would question why he was standing next to an unconscious man and an obviously confused lady. Izuku quickly scurried off, leaving the poor woman and her unconscious tormentor in his wake. Unbeknownst to both him and Eraserhead at the time, this was the day or night when a new vigilante was born. The exact moment hadn't come yet, but it soon would. Eraserhead sighed as he questioned the distressed woman. He wanted to chase after the small figure who'd ran, but it was surprisingly fast and he couldn't exactly leave the poor woman alone. He decided to ask the woman who the figure was. I was a young boy, P probably S7 or 8 at the oldest, B but it might be a S stretch that he J jumped F from the fire E escape and K kicked the G guy in the F face. She said sorry to me, after I T thanked him that I don't K know why he apologized to me after he S saved me. She stuttered to Eraserhead, eyes shifting to the unconscious criminal every now and then in fear, even though he was in quirk-suppressant cuffs and the police, who he guessed one of the apartment building's tenants had called, were about to put him in their car. He sighed once again. This could end up being a new vigilante and he honestly wasn't bothered to take up another vigilante case. He just decided to assume it was a one-time thing and let the kid off for his act of vigilantism. He didn't want to possibly ruin a 7-year-old kid's life. He thanked her, sent her on her way, and walked up to Tsukachi, who greeted him, "Hey, Eraserhead. Nice work with this guy. Are you finished questioning the victim? Is she injured?" "No, she's fine, just a bit distressed. And I wasn't the one who dealt with this guy." "Oh, who did?" According to her, some kid jumped from the fire escape and knocked the guy out with a kick. When she thanked him, he said sorry to her. "I actually saw the kid when I came to deal with the situation, but he ran away before I could catch sight of any distinguishing features." "Did she say how old he was?" "She said around 7, maybe 8 at the oldest, but she said 8 might be a stretch, so I decided we should probably just leave it be. It's not as if a child that young would want to be a vigilante." Izuku wanted to be a vigilante. He had ran from the scene, but he decided to run back to check on the lady. He swore that he wouldn't let anything happen to that lady, right? What if another guy had come along, knocked out Eraserhead, and was now doing stuff to her as he was running away like a coward? He couldn't just let that happen. He was also still on an adrenaline rush from saving her and was not thinking straight at all. When he arrived back at the scene, he saw Eraserhead talking to a detective, the woman seemingly having left, to Izuku's relief. He overheard the conversation between the two men. According to her, some kid jumped from the fire escape and knocked the guy out with a kick. When she thanked him, he said sorry to her. I actually saw the kid when I came to deal with the situation, but he ran away before I could catch sight of any distinguishing features. Eraserhead sighed to the detective, who gave the underground hero a worried look. Did she say how old he was? Izuku had to hold back his laughter at the underground hero's reply. She said around 7, maybe 8 at the oldest, but she said 8 might be a stretch, so I decided we should probably just leave it be. It's not as if a child that young would want to be a vigilante. 8 was a stretch? Izuku almost wanted to come out from the corner he was hiding behind and outright tell them he was 10, but even though Eraserhead said to leave it be, he didn't know if it was just because he didn't mind the small child's heroic act, because he was presumably 7, or because they couldn't find him. Izuku didn't want to risk either of the latter possibilities. But something else Eraserhead had said struck Izuku as interesting. A vigilante? Was that what people that kid things like that were called? Vigilantes? As much as Izuku didn't want to admit it, saving that lady felt good, even if it meant that he had to knock a man out to do it. And it wasn't exactly like Izuku could go to a hero school now. He was on the run. It wasn't as if they'd accept him either, since he was quirkless. Maybe he could still be a hero, just in his own way. The voice telling him to just kill himself already and stop being delusional was still looming in the back of his mind, but he told himself that he'd still do it, but it could wait. It replied that he was being a coward. He just shot back that he could at least do something somewhat useful with the time he had left. He still had time to kill himself. If he could just save one person between now and the time he finally did jump off a roof, that was enough for him. And at this exact moment, Izuku decided. He wanted to be a vigilante. Alias? Who'd if knows? Izuku sighed as he downed a bottle of water after training. He used to fill up a whole bunch of water bottles in the convenience store bathroom, but he finally figured out how to build a water purifier using materials he'd found while he was training at Dagboa Municipal Beach, which was also where he lived at the moment. Sure, sleeping among a bunch of trash on a hard mattress that has a bunch of loose springs digging into his back wasn't the best, but it wasn't exactly the worst either. Because now he wasn't a burden, and having that weight lifted off his shoulders was well worth having to deal with loose springs and trash. They'd looked for him for about 3 days before giving up, but honestly, he should have expected that. There was no reason for them to continue looking for a burden like him. Hey, maybe his vigilante name should be inutile? No, that was stupid. He had to think of something actually impactful? No. He wouldn't be able to come up with something like that. He'd just settle for good. That was probably the best he could do. Now wasn't the time to be thinking of vigilante names anyway. He had been training for the past 5 months or so, doing battle training, swinging around a stick, physical training, cleaning up the beach as he searched for support item parts, and rescue training, doing small things to help around the community, all while teaching himself normal stuff, such as history, science, and math, while also teaching himself not-so-normal stuff, such as how to build support items and how to pick locks. Sure, it might be a crime to pick the lock of a restaurant's dumpster, but it was all going to the dump anyway. He might as well get some use out of the food they threw away. He'd managed to build a baton. It wasn't very well made, and it definitely wasn't made out of the best materials, but it was something. The voice in the back of his mind told him that he shouldn't be proud of something like this, but he told it to shut up. It had been getting louder and louder every single day, and he just wanted some time away from it, so he blocked it out. He knew when he allowed it to speak again, when he decided to listen to it once more, it would be an absolute train wreck, but for now, he wasn't going to listen. He needed to focus, because tonight he was going to patrol for the first time. He'd made a makeshift vigilante outfit, and as much as he didn't want to admit it, it was totally inspired by All Might. He'd added bunny-like ears to his only hoodie by cutting some of the torso off the overly baggy article of clothing. During his rescue training, it had just stayed as a regular hoodie while he attempted to teach himself how to sew, but now it had a bit of flair. He had been upset that he couldn't really wear his hoodie anymore, seeing as it would connect him to his vigilante persona, but he could probably find one amongst the trash in Dagboa. He'd just need to patch it up a bit. He'd found a hole-filled white shirt among the trash once, had washed it at a cheap laundromat along with the rest of his clothes when he finally found enough loose change to pay the 200 yen fee, and had cut it up to make a smile on a dark gray mask he definitely had not shoplifted. His mask had been his staple since the beginning of his rescue training, but very few people recognized him from it since he only did random odd jobs and not taking down criminals, like the inspiration for his mask, and now his hoodie. All Might had been his idol since he first saw him on TV when he was 3. He would watch his debut video on loop during his computer time when he was still with his Inko and Hisashi. He was kind of embarrassed that he'd gone all in on the All Might fanboy thing, but he had bigger issues to think about. He'd need to find something more warm to put underneath his hoodie, but for now he had been wearing just a black crewneck tee. He had also been wearing his only pair of shoes, which were bright red sneakers. If he hadn't gone with the ears on his hoodie or the smile on his mask, his shoes would definitely be his most eye-catching feature, other than the literal weapon he was carrying around. He donned his vigilante costume as the street lamps came on, ready to go out for his first real patrol, and the first time that he wouldn't listen to the constantly berating voice in the back of his head. Izuku wandered the streets of Mustafu, sighing. He thought as he was in the more rundown area of Mustafu, he'd have run into a multitude of criminals by now, especially as most crimes around the area occurred at night. Obviously, he was glad his town wasn't overrun with crime, but how would get a chance to prove he could be useful if there wasn't any criminals to fight? He could only be useful if he could save people. He spoke too soon. The next alleyway he peeked into had 2 men there, one obviously much more distressed than the other, clutching a wad of money. The other man was shouting something, though the only thing Izuku could make out was, "Not enough." Drag deal gone wrong. The distressed man didn't bring enough cash and now he was screwed. Well, unless Izuku had anything to say about it. Or whatever the hell his vigilante alias was going to be. He knew that despite the distressed man seemingly occupying the other man's complete concentration, there was the possibility that at any moment the other man, or madman, which seemed to be a suitable nickname, might see Izuku out of the corner of his eye. So what did Izuku decide to be the best course of action? Running at the madman and bopping him on the head as hard as possible with his baton. Unfortunately, it didn't work as well as he'd hoped. Turns out that attacking the head wasn't a guaranteed win. The man turned his head to glare at Izuku and snarled, "Brat. You'll regret that." Izuku flinched as the muted voice began filling his head again, beginning to tell him that he was going to die useless, that he couldn't even be useful by killing himself and making somebody else do the work for him, but he almost immediately blocked it out once more. He couldn't allow the voice to distract him now, when the man in front of him could very easily crush his skull. The distressed man's wide eyes darted between Izuku and Madman before he dashed off. Madman turned for a moment, obviously considering running after distressed man. As terrified as Izuku was, he couldn't let Madman do that. He couldn't let him just kill the distressed man. If anybody had to die tonight, it would be Izuku, but he was useless, and he couldn't do anything right, because he was worthless and weak and couldn't even make up for it with AQ. And there came the voice again. Izuku blocked it out once again, deciding that if it broke through he'd just have to deal with it. Even though Izuku had been extremely confident in the fact that whacking criminals in the head would be greatly effective and would guarantee that he would win the fight, he decided to study other things in case that his small amount of doubt was justified. One thing he'd studied was a fun thing called pressure points. If used wrong, he could end up killing this man, but it was either him and distressed man, or just madman. This was insane. He could end up killing a man during his debut. Then he'd just be a villain, not a vigilante. And how would he be able to deal with the fact that he'd murdered a man? That he'd taken a life, despite their twisted morals or their violent tendencies? He wouldn't be able to handle the guilt. But he had to go through with it. It was his only choice, other than running. And Izuku wasn't going to run. He used a trash can next to him as leverage and then jumped up. Before Madman could turn back around to see Izuku, he delivered a swift chop to one of Madman's pressure points. The criminal fell with a thud. Izuku stood there for a moment, before walking over to Madman. He reached a hand under the man's chest, knowing he probably wouldn't be able to flip him over, and breathed a heavy sigh of relief once he felt the man's heartbeat. He pulls out a bag of zip ties, a wad of post-it notes, and a pen that he zip-tied the man's wrists and ankles together, so if he awoke while the police were arriving he wouldn't be able to escape. He tries his best to push the man up against the alley wall, barely managing, which led the voice to break through a bit. Attempting to ignore the tiny whisper that would most likely soon grow into the loud, surprisingly familiar voice it had adapted into more recently, he began to write on the post-it note before sticking it on the drag dealer's chest and hopping off. This was my debut. Pretty nice job if I do say so myself. I don't have a name yet, but I'll just give you my motto for now. Memento mori. Love, Japan's newest vigilante. Shoyuta sighed as he read the note, taking a picture to send to Tsukachi before pocketing it and wrapping the villain, who was tied up with zip ties of all things, in his capture weapon. He didn't know what quirk the man had, but it definitely wasn't going to be contained within zip ties. Sure, his capture weapon wasn't the best either, certainly not to the level of quirk-canceling cuffs, but it would do much more to restrain the villain than a few pieces of flimsy plastic. At least, that's what he thought. Over the next few days, though most of the villains were unconscious, very few were awake, and still bound by the flimsy pieces of plastic. He assumed that those who were still bound had just committed a small crime such as stealing a handbag. Once, he guessed that the vigilante had seen him use his capture scarf rather than trusting the zip ties would keep the criminal secure when they woke up once more. Because the next criminal he found that the vigilante had dealt with had been kept awake. She was a gang member, of all things, one that had been reigning terror over Mustafu for the past year or so with the rest of her gang. Yet she hadn't been able to escape the vicious strength of the zip ties, just like the others, the post-it notes. On the woman's forehead made it very obvious that the vigilante seemed to think that zip ties were enough to keep the woman secure, and in this case, he was right. The note the unnamed vigilante had left had been so long that he had to leave multiple posts, one on the woman's forehead and one on her nose. From the way she was growling, Eraser assumed she wasn't a fan of the vigilante's post-it placement. You seem to think that the zip ties weren't enough, Eraser. It made me really sad. Zip ties are all I can afford to help you guys capture villains and criminals. I thought about doubling the amount I used on this lady's wrists and ankles, but that would be inhumane. It would be super duper uncomfy. They may be criminals, but that doesn't mean they deserve to be treated like that. Anyway, don't mistrust the power of zip ties, okay, Eraser? W alias? Who'd if knows? As he ripped off the post-it notes and pocketed them, he brought out one of the old ones the vigilante had written, which just had the vigilante's strange signature on it. He crossed out the signature with a pen and writ under it, "I'm not carrying a villain. It's not that I don't trust your zip ties, but my capture weapon makes transportation easier. Even if you'd somehow found quirk-canceling cuffs to use, as long as the villain couldn't stand, the capture weapon would be vital." Eraserhead. He didn't want to indulge in the vigilante's strange little gimmick and knew he shouldn't, but from the way the vigilante wrote, he suspected them to be a child. Or a man-child. It wasn't as if these replies to the vigilante would become frequent. It was just a one-time thing to reassure the vigilante. Replies from Eraserhead became a frequent thing that Izuku looked forward to. If he returned a while later to a spot he'd left a villain for the man, he would find a post-it note. At least Izuku knew the man was reading the notes now. Izuku honestly thought the man had just been pocketing them and dropping them off at the station for them to read. But now he had the reassurance that the man wasn't ignoring him. He had yet to bump into Eraserhead since his 10th birthday, but he guessed that he should be glad. Despite the fact that he really liked the underground hero, and would do almost anything to meet him, one of the few things he wouldn't do was risk his life by running into him as a vigilante. He knew that being a vigilante was illegal, so if he ran into Eraserhead, the man would arrest him on sight, at least if he knew what the boy looked like. Technically, it wasn't illegal for Izuku, as he didn't have a quirk, and he couldn't be arrested for using something non-existent. But Eraser didn't know that. He mostly acted in self-defense if there was even the slightest possibility of winning without making the first attack. But Eraser didn't know that. He despised the fact that he couldn't use this hobby, though it had become more of a lifestyle for him, as an excuse to meet heroes, but he decided it was for the best. Meeting a few heroes wouldn't matter in the long run, no matter how cool they are. Not when he was planning to kill himself in July. It was about 2 months till then, being May now. He was quite proud of what he'd done since December, since his true debut, but he knew it wasn't enough. The voice knew it wasn't enough. He'd recently figured out who the voice resembled more and more with each passing day. It was Kaken. Izuku didn't know why. At least, he didn't want to know why. But he had the slightest hunch. He had always idolized All Might, but the idol who had been in his life, practically since Bjarch, was Kaken. He'd known the other boy for 10 years. He'd only known All Might for 7, technically 3, as he hadn't been able to catch much about the symbol of peace since he was thrown into the system, only recently being able to begin to catch up with everything All Might had done over the years. He'd known all Kaken had done over the years, since he had a front row seat. He'd been the victim of most of it since he was 4, and before that had done it with him, or had at least been there to see it. Kaken was amazing. He had an incredible quirk and had a deep well of confidence that Izuku could only dream of having. He'd not teased Izuku for being quirkless, like everybody else. But Kaken was the one most involved in it. He told Izuku to kill himself once. That was when the voice started appearing. The voice used to be quite subtle, still there, but not particularly strong nor loud. But now that Kaken wasn't there, he guessed the voice decided to stand in for Kaken, rather than just be a low hum that stuck in his mind. It was now shouting at him constantly, tearing him apart. But Izuku didn't mind. Because in a way, he still had Kaken. So he listened to the voice. He had to block it out when he was doing vigilante work, sure. He couldn't really afford the distraction during those times. But he was glad to take whatever the voice had built up over that time. Because Kaken was the closest thing to a friend he'd ever had. And now that the voice took the place of Kaken, it was the closest thing he had to a friend. Both Shoyuta and Tsukachi sat across from one of the criminals their mysterious vigilante had captured. She was one of the few the boy had left conscious. All those who were found unconscious usually didn't remember any features of the vigilante they had encountered, so those who were conscious were their best hope. The most they'd gotten from those who were conscious so far was that the vigilante was short and that they were grinning. The drag dealer that had been a part of the vigilante's debut obviously knew more than he let on, but he refused to answer any of their questions. They'd gotten lucky with this woman. We have reason to believe that a certain vigilante was the one who caught you. Can you give us any details about them? Tsukachi started, and the woman in front of the two gave them a Cheshire grin. I'd love to. That brat has been causing a bunch of problems for me and my associates, so I'll be glad to take him down. You mean your gang? Shoyuta corrected. The woman just glared at him before continuing, he's tiny. He wears this cropped green hoodie with crappy rabbit ears on them and a mask with a smile on it. He also has these really ugly red sneakers. Tsukachi signaled to Shoyuta. Is that all? Did you catch his voice, anything? Shoyuta continued the officer's line of questioning for him. No, as far as I can tell. He avoids speaking if he can help it, at least loud enough to hear. He mumbles a lot, but it's muffled by the mask. Though, honestly, you probably wouldn't be able to decipher it without the mask. One of my associates, who gave me most of this information, say it's like his mouth is going a mile a minute under that mask. She cackled. My own encounter with him was very brief, so I didn't get to experience his muttering myself. Tsukachi signaled once again. Shoyuta didn't particularly like the fact that it sounded as if one of her associates had escaped the vigilante's grasp, but he might end up finding the villain himself, so he was fine with it. Despite what the vigilante was doing being illegal, he didn't particularly want the vigilante to get hurt. He was still a civilian, after all. Hopefully, the escaped villain would discourage the vigilante from continuing his work, or at least deter him a little. Though so far, it didn't seem like that was the case. His most recent failure only fired up Izuku more. He only had a month and a half more till the day he was to give up being a vigilante, and his own life, for the good of Mustafu and the world in general. But, even with such a short amount of time left, he still wanted to spend it being somewhat useful, despite what Kaken's voice screamed at him in his mind. He couldn't spend what little time he had left in this world feeling sorry for himself over something like letting a villain escape. Sure, he fretted over it for a while, but he told himself he'd find the villain again. He had to. As he strolled around in his uniform that night, questioning if he could really do this, Mostly due to the Kaken-like voice in his head screaming profanities and slurs at him, he suddenly caught sight of something. A small twinkle that darted inside an alley. A jewelry thief? He quickly had to silence Kaken's voice so he could concentrate, much to his dismay. He didn't particularly enjoy not having the comfort of Kaken while he was doing such dangerous and fear-inducing work, but what he felt didn't matter as long as he was saving people. He darted after the sparkle and allowed it to guide him throughout the twists and turns of the alleyway. At some point, they must have gotten closer to the streets, as the alley began to be lit up a bit more, possibly by the street lights. Lucky for Izuku, the end of the alleyway was blocked by a chain-link fence, leaving whoever he was chasing unable to escape him before he caught up. He stared at the criminal and his eyes widened. It was the man who he had failed to capture. He was holding a handbag that was bejeweled with fake rhinestones. The man himself had a crow quirk, a mutation, so Izuku guessed the shine of the rhinestones under the streetlights must have caught his attention. Izuku stared at the criminal before gripping his baton tighter. He wasn't going to allow this guy to escape again. He couldn't. But he wasn't exactly anticipating what would happen next. The crow began sending his feathers to attack Izuku, which cut through the air like arrows. Izuku could barely dodge them, one cutting his shoulder and leaving a deep gash. He had to hold back his wince. He'd need to bandage that later. Izuku spoke before he could stop himself. "You have two quirks? Is your appearance a secondary mutation caused by your emitter quirk? Why didn't you use your quirk in our last dash?" A second feather cutting his leg was what brought Izuku back to his senses. He couldn't exactly analyze a criminal mid-battle. He just asked Eraser for all the info on the guy's quirk using post-it notes. A capture weapon quickly wrapped around the crow criminal. Izuku looked up above, and there he was. Eraserhead. "Oh shit." The man hopped down and glared at Izuku, a subtle confused expression on his face. He attempted to use his quirk on Izuku. That was a waste. Especially since he could have used it on the villain that just attempted to send a feather through his skull. Which the underground hero caught. Eraserhead turned his head to glare at the villain, and nodded slightly with a... He turned back to Izuku, who was currently fanboying far too hard. Seemingly about to talk to him, when a breathing woman appeared, obviously having run there. When she noticed the handbag, her eyes went wide. She quickly picked it up and turned to look at her saviors, though she obviously wouldn't recognize either of them. "You're Rabbit, right? You're famous around here. Thank you for helping me." The woman beamed and Izuku deadpanned for a moment, before beginning to scream internally. While on the inside he was dying of both embarrassment and excitement, he just nervously chuckled a "you're welcome" and left it at that. The woman left after thanking him once more. Eraserhead turned to the boy. "So, you have an alias now? Or are you a different, short, grinning vigilante who wears red sneakers?" "I'm Rabbit." Izuku quickly accepted the alias. He wasn't exactly thinking straight, still freaking out about being famous around here, and ended up rejecting the alias he had decided on earlier that day. "Do you like it, Eraser?" "Why are you asking me? I'm going to be the one asking the questions down at the station." "We're taking you in, Rabbit." "Don't think so, but it was lovely to meet you, Eraser. I gotta go patch up, bye-bye now." Izuku grinned underneath his mask before beginning to run. Eraser began to chase after him, but with the crowman in the grasp of his capture scarf, he was finding it hard to keep up with the nimble vigilante. When Izuku, or Rabbit, finally lost the man, he sighed in relief before running back down to the beach. He flopped onto his mattress, not even bothering to change out of his vigilante uniform. Before realizing he probably should in case he was found while he was sleeping. He changed into something less suspicious, and bandaged the wounds he had almost completely forgotten about during his escape, until he noticed the bloody stains on his uniform. Izuku flopped onto the mattress once again, ready to just sleep for the rest of his life, however short that may be. Rabbit. He liked that. He was Rabbit. And he would do his best to protect the citizens who had assigned him that very name. The vigilante and the boy. Shoyuta was having a good patrol so far. He had only started an hour ago, so he may be jinxing the rest of it, but so far he had apprehended 3 criminals, and not one of them was from Rabbit, which was a relief. He hoped the vigilante was just taking a night off or something. It was quite a nice night, surprisingly cool for July. Maybe the vigilante was taking the time to just enjoy it. Though, if his patrol kept going well, maybe he should hope Rabbit was out and about tonight. Maybe he could apprehend the vigilante. Or maybe he wouldn't. Because his good patrol was flipped on its head when he noticed something on a rooftop. He squinted his eyes to try and make out what was up there. A child. He dashed over as fast as he could, hoping he wouldn't be too late. The small form began to fall, and Shoyuta just barely caught the boy with his capture weapon. He walked closer and let the boy down from his capture weapon, ready to catch him if he were to fall, most likely having gone unconscious from his suicide attempt. However, the boy stood straight. Shoyuta was about to breathe a sigh of relief, but stopped in his tracks when the boy looked up at him with dull green eyes. "Why did you save me, Eraserhead?" he muttered in a monotone voice. Shoyuta was taken aback by the fact that the boy knew who he was, but ignored it for now. The boy looked to be around 8 or maybe 9 years old, though he decided to confirm it with the child. "How old are you, kid?" "I just turned 11 a moment ago." The boy muttered once more, wearing a poker face. "Okay." Older than Shoyuta thought, he decided to ask another question. "What's your name?" "I don't think you need to know that, Erase, sir." The kid corrected himself, seemingly wanting to be more polite. Well, that went nowhere. He wanted to continue making conversation with the green-haired boy to calm them both down, but the boy seemed nonchalant about what had just occurred. Was such a young child really gone that far? He didn't really want to question the boy about this immediately, but he needed to decide if he should take the boy down to the station. "Why did you jump?" "A burden such as me has no place in Japan, let alone the world. I wanted to help, and I thought jumping would work. I tried to do the same last year, but I got distracted." The boy replied, his voice still monotone. Shoyuta sighed. "Kid, I think I might have to take you down to the station dash." "That isn't necessary, sir. Just pretend like this never occurred. There is no reason to trouble yourself with a burden like me." "Sorry, kid, but I have to take you down, especially now that you've said that." "I'd rather not go to the police, sir." He continued to oppose Shoyuta, who grumbled, "At least let me walk you home." "That is not necessary either. I will be perfectly fine on my own." The boy continued to push. "You just tried to commit suicide. How can I trust you to be fine? If you're not going to the police, I need to at least go with you to tell your guardians about this dash." Before Shoyuta could finish, the boy had begun a mad dash away from the underground hero. He began to chase after the child, but he was surprisingly nimble for a kid his age, especially one so short. He gave up when the child was out of sight, and just continued on with his patrol. He just hoped he wouldn't wake up in the morning to find out on the news that a small, green-haired boy at the age of 11 had committed suicide. It was a year before he met the boy again. Exactly a year. Rabbit had been giving him the runaround for the past couple of nights, and it was taking a toll on his already terrible sleep schedule. Hitoshi had almost convinced him to take the night off, but he couldn't give up on a chance to catch Rabbit. The vigilante had been active for a year and a half. He usually would have caught them by now. Surprisingly, the vigilante hadn't appeared at all that night, at last for now. But he noticed somebody else. On the same building as last year, on the same day at the same time, there was a small figure. Shoyuta hoped it wasn't the same child, but the circumstances told him that it was. As the small figure stepped off the ledge, the underground hero jumped into action once more. He walked over to the figure who was wrapped in his capture scarf, and sure enough, it was the same small, freckled boy as last year, his fluffy green hair just as much of a tangled mess as it was before. He let the boy go, and once again he stood perfectly fine. He began to walk off, and Shoyuta followed him. "You know I really have to take you to the station this time, right?" Shoyuta asked the boy as they strolled. He was ready to run if the boy decided to do so himself, just like he had last year. "You don't have to, Eraserhead. You could just leave me alone." The boy replied. "You know I can't do that, kid. Don't just assume that I know things. A burden like me isn't particularly knowledgeable, especially in your field of work. Just the fact that you know who I am makes you seem pretty knowledgeable. Sir, please do not lie to me. I am perfectly aware of what I am and how I seem to be in the eyes of others. It's always the same. The boy shot back, a small bit of anger in his usually calm and collected tone. The boy began to run once again, and Shoyuta was unable to catch him once again. When did he become so bad at his job that a 12-year-old could outrun him? The very next year, the exact same thing happened. Again. It had only happened 3 times, but Shoyuta was already getting tired of this. It was always at midnight on July 15th, on top of the exact same apartment complex each time. He'd jump and Shoyuta would catch him, and then they'd have a fruitless conversation afterward. He was lucky that Rabbit didn't seem to patrol on that particular day, his one day off each year as far as Shoyuta knew. Seriously, what is your name, kid? Shoyuta decided to ask the boy once again. You may not remember, but I have already told you that such information is not necessary. The boy responded, looking up at him with those lifeless green eyes of his. They seemed to get duller each time Shoyuta saw him. What is necessary information? It depends on the situation. In this situation, my name is not necessary. The boy replied. I'd prefer to call you something other than just the boy. The boy was silent for a moment, before speaking once more. My family name is Midoriya. I won't tell you my given name though. Midoriya is all you'll get. Nice to meet you, Midoriya. Though it has been nice to meet you as well, I'm not particularly fond of the circumstances. I'd prefer not to see you again next year, Eraserhead. Please do not postpone my death any longer. It is benefiting nobody. Midoriya muttered, and Shoyuta sighed as he watched the boy run away from the 3rd time, not even bothering to chase after the 13-year-old. He knew he wouldn't be able to catch Midoriya. Shoyuta sighed. This was getting absolutely ridiculous. He attempted to jump again. Same temp, same place. He grumbled as he walked with the boy, ready to grab his capture weapon. The child was surely going to run off for the 4th time, and he wanted to get this over with. He didn't want to continue saving this child every year for the rest of his life. Midoriya was the one who started the conversation this time. I thought I told you to stop. Kid, it's really not worth it to kill yourself. Trust me. Why should I, Eraserhead? Why should I trust you? Midoriya's voice cracked slightly, tears pricking his eyes. It was the most emotion he'd shown for 2 years. Shoyuta waited for the boy to continue. I want to die, Eraserhead. There's no reason for me to live. It's the only way I can redeem myself. I can't do it by being a hero, so just let me die, please. Redeem yours dash. Midoriya began to run again before Shoyuta could finish, and before he could even think of using his capture weapon. The boy was out of sight quickly. He was much faster than the first time they'd met, Shoyuta would give him that. But he couldn't really help but sigh. He decided that he despised July 15th. For that day meant that if he was even a fraction of a second late, this small child would lose his life. Sure, his job was always like that, but despite the fact that Shoyuta barely knew this kid, that lifeless look in his eyes made Shoyuta want to protect him. He wouldn't let Midoriya die. He'd make sure of it. And if he got the chance, he'd show him that he's not a burden, even though Shoyuta didn't know the circumstances. So this next part is completely new because Aizu had the wrong age. I forgot he is currently 16 in canon, so he would be 15 now. So enjoy this new part that probably won't work as well because it was kinda just shoved in here, dash. Author-chan 2 hearts, 2 hearts, 2 hearts. The last time he'd seen Midoriya for now was when the child would have just turned 15. He was getting sick of this. The day he despised had arrived once more. July 15th. As Shuta's scarf shot out to Midoriya's rescue, the boy immediately wriggled out, landed safely on the ground, and then ran to the fire escape to attempt the jump again. Shoyuta hadn't been expecting that, yet he was still quick enough to bound the boy with his scarf once again, but tighter this time so the boy couldn't escape. He pulled the boy closer, and when Midoriya finally seemed to calm down, he released the boy from his bindings. As the child began to stomp off, Shoyuta followed him, only to hear a couple of sniffles come from the tiny child. Hey kid Ardash. How many times do I have to tell you to stop saving me? I need to die. I have to die. Yet you won't let me. But. Why? Tears welled up in the child's lifeless eyes, and Shoyuta wanted to hold the boy close, but he couldn't. The kid obviously needed to get his feelings out. If I don't kill myself, I'll never have done anything useful with my life. The only useful thing I can do with my life is die. So then I can redeem myself. My reason for existing is to be a burden, so I don't want to exist anymore. I never wanted to be a burden, Eraserhead. I just wanted to be useful. I just wanted to be a hero. But I can't be useful. I can't be a hero. Because all I am is a burden. That's all I am, and all I ever will be. The boy was out of sight before Shoyuta could even process what had just happened. That's all I am, and all I ever will be? Shoyuta sighed. This child was an enigma. Not a burden, like the child thought he was, but certainly an enigma. So, if y'all are confused about this or not, Byuda Aizu has light in his eyes because he can actually enjoy himself without listening to the voice in his head /Kaken. But when he's not rabbit, since he's being pushed down constantly and being told to kill himself, his will to live being crushed once again in the process, Author-chan 2 hearts 2 hearts 2 hearts. Izuku sighed as he pulled off his voice changer, which he had decided to make after he met Eraserhead as Izuku for the first time. He couldn't have the man recognize him out of costume due to his voice, and slipped his hoodie over his head. His patrol that night had been fruitless. Kaken told him it would be, and even if he did find somebody, he'd probably fail them. He knew Kaken was right. Kaken was always right that he should have just stayed at the beach and messed with some of his support items. He'd seen Eraserhead though. He was still mad at the man for the previous night, but he couldn't exactly blame it. He didn't really know that Midoriya was the vigilante he despised. Though, he guessed Eraserhead didn't despise him as much as Izuku thought he did. Eraserhead had been sitting on a roof, obviously having a slow night himself. Izuku walked up next to him and also sat down, swinging his legs off the side of the building. They sat there for a while before Eraserhead began to talk. You know I could arrest you at any moment, right? Izuku just responded with a hum. So why are you sitting here with me? 'Cause I felt like it, Izuku sing-songed. Do you feel like getting arrested as well? Now that I think about it, not really. So leave. What? Is the great Eraserhead really just going to let a vigilante go? You've been after me for 4.5 years, Eraser. I thought you'd be jumping at the chance. Well, apparently I'm not skilled enough at my job to bring a couple kids in. Izuku knew what he meant by that, but he decided to push anyway. A couple of kids? Didn't know there were more vigilantes my age. Ooh, maybe I might meet them on patrol. God no, if there were more child vigilantes like you I'd quit. You're bad enough. No, it's something else. Oh, spilled razor. I want to hear all about it. Your job is super interesting. My work isn't for your enjoyment. And never call me Razor again. Don't count on it, Razor. But if I tell you, will you stop calling me Razor? But I will stop annoying you for the rest of the night. Fair deal. Okay, so, there's this kid. I've stopped him from killing himself 4 times already. His eyes. There's no light in them. Izuku was utterly confused. His eyes weren't lifeless, were they? He didn't think they were. What do you mean? He just looks so dead inside. A child so young shouldn't be like that, you know? He should just be, I don't know, enjoying his school years and making the most of his childhood. Not attempting to commit suicide annually as soon as it's his birthday. Sorry for butting in, but when does this happen? Always on July 15th. Same time, same place. So it was Izuku. Not some other kid that Eraserhead was also stopping from committing suicide every year on their birthday. He wished it was just an impossible coincidence, but such a thing was just that. Impossible. Diamond, Razored at that's I don't know what that is. Izuku thought for a moment, unsure of what to say. Is this the only time you see that kid? When he's trying to kill himself? Yet I should try to dig into him, but I don't know his Eraserhead stopped for a moment, and Izuku knew exactly why. Eraserhead had realized that he had his family name. And his appearance. And that it was pretty fing obvious that the boy lived in Mustafu. You all right there, Razor? Didn't die on me, did ya? Izuku joked, trying to calm his nerves about the situation. The man just stood up. I've got to go. I can't just sit around while I have work to do. You're really not gonna arrest me, Razor? Wow, you really are garbage at your job. I thought you weren't going to annoy me? You really should know by now not to trust vigilantes, Razor. Eraserhead left then. Izuku stayed on the rooftop for a while, contemplating how screwed he might be, but he returned home to the beach when he realized that another hero might find him on the rooftop and capture him. He sighed as he pulled his halter over his head, which was a more recent addition to his vigilante costume that was much warmer than a black crew neck, and was a nice contrast to his hoodie, being olive green and skin-tight rather than bronze green and baggy. He ended up using the black crew neck to sleep in instead. He recently found another hoodie in the dump. He had ended up shoplifting another bronze green one when he had become skilled enough at it to do so, but this one was a dark gray, similar to his mask. It was a bit holey, but he'd managed to stitch and patch it up. Now he could go around at night as Izuku. Or just live in the hoodie. That was a better idea. At least it would stop people from asking if he was Rabbit because all they knew was that he wore a bronze green hoodie and a mask, which was also what Izuku wore in public, though it was a black mask. He'd never wear his voice changer as Izuku. Sure, he was Rabbit, but they didn't need to know that. Izuku attempted to fill his head with more nonsense that had occurred since he became Rabbit, but his mind kept circling back to Eraserhead and how he could possibly look up his file. And then find out the Midoriya he'd been saving was a burden of a foster kid who ran away from his most recent home and hadn't been seen since the day before his 10th birthday. He didn't want Eraserhead to hate him as Izuku, but maybe if he did hate him, now he would no longer stop him from killing himself. Izuku didn't even consider the possibility that Eraserhead may end up seeking him out and giving him back the government. He wouldn't become a burden to them again. He couldn't. Clash book. Next bit should be titled, How TF Do I Differentiate This Part from My Other Fanfic? This is gonna hurt. Author-chan 2 hearts 2 hearts 2 hearts. Izuku wasn't having a good day. A good day was an extraordinarily rare thing for him though, so it was more like that he wasn't having a fine day. In fact, it was one of the worst days of his life, and that was a feat to behold. It had started out good. During his patrol that night, he'd stopped a drag ring. Sure, anybody could do that, as Kaken had told him when he got back to the beach, and he wasn't special, but at least they had been stopped. He'd woken up to it being a lovely, warm day, which was expected for July, but still a nice surprise. He decided that he should go and walk around Mustafu a bit, so he slipped on a t-shirt he'd found in the dump that literally said t-shirt on it. He didn't know why anybody would throw such a thing away. It was hilarious. And tied his rabbit hoodie around his waist in case the weather turned on him. Sure, somebody may end up noticing the hoodie, but he could just say he was a rabbit fanboy. Even if the weather turned on him, it certainly wouldn't be too cold since it was summer, so he preferred to grab his rabbit hoodie rather than one of his massive, baggy ones that practically draped over his small frame. He put on his mask and pocketed his rabbit one, also as a just in case. Sometimes he stumbled upon crime while he was out and about in the day, so he'd put the mask on and jump in. It was making him consider during daytime patrols as well, threw his backpack over his shoulders, and set off, allowing his feet and Kaken to guide him. On his way to wherever he was being guided to, he had witnessed the debut of a new hero called Empty Lady. But she had stolen the credit of another hero called Kamui Woods, who Izuku quite liked. He knew all of the guy's special moves off by heart, though that was mostly because he played hero videos in the background while he was making support items. He continued on his way, wondering where he was being guided. He wasn't expecting to be guided to Aldra Junior High. Sure, he knew that this was the school Kaken planned to go to, and he'd seen the boy walking around Mustafu in the uniform, which is usually why he wore hoodies around, but he wasn't sure why the voice in his head, that was only in the place of Kaken, though it was just like Kaken he knew everything, would bring him to the real Kaken. Was it bored of him already? Was it bringing him to Kaken because it didn't want to deal with him anymore? He couldn't be a burden on Kaken. And Aunt Mitsuki. And Uncle Masaru. He didn't want to be a burden on anybody. He turned around, tears pricking his eyes. He hadn't noticed that some sort of sludge monster had appeared behind him, slowly approaching him throughout his mini freakout. And now it was right in front of his face. Ah, a medium-sized invisibility cloak. You'll do nicely, The sludge monster gave him a grin before shoving a tendril of slime down his throat. He slowly began to drag Izuku closer to the sewer he had come out of. Izuku attempted to struggle against the villain, do anything he could to escape, but he was completely powerless against the villain. "Don't worry, I'm just going to take over your body." He laughed before continuing, "Calm down. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. You'll feel better soon. Don't make this harder for the both of us." Izuku suddenly realized he was about to die at the hands of this villain. He quickly began to claw in the sludge, but that only earned another laugh from his captor. "Grab all you want, my body's made out of fluid. Thanks for the help. You're a real hero to me, kid. I didn't know he was in the city. I gotta get out of here fast before he tracks me down." The villain muttered as he continued suffocating Izuku. Kaken was right. He would die useless. The real Kaken was also right. We would never be In front of him, the freckled boy could hear a sewer lid fly off, his eyes flickering from open and closed and leaving his vision as an unreliable source of information. He just hoped that whoever the was that the villain was talking about had just appeared, as whoever the sludge-quirked man had mentioned was obviously a hero of some sort. If it was Endeavor, he'd rather just die here and now. "Have no fear, you're safe. Now that I am here, that is." The voice shouted. Whoever the person was, they were loud. Extremely loud. But at least Izuku could cross out Endeavor. The man would never say such comforting words. Texas.smash. The stranger screamed. The phrase was quite familiar to Izuku, and he suddenly began to recognize the voice. "I can't hold together." The villain cried as his hold on Izuku was ripped away from him, along with his body as it splattered everywhere. The freckled boy slowly opened his eyes, his vision wavering, but he just about made out a tan man punching the villain. He had blonde hair that spiked up at the front like rabbit ears, and was an absolute giant. Izuku recognized him as his and Kaken's idol pretty much since they were born. "Is that All Might?" he questioned to himself, but he couldn't dwell on it as he finally slipped into unconsciousness for good. Or at least for a while. "EY. Hey. Wake up. HUI. Though we lost you there." All Might yelled as usual as Izuku began to awaken. He opened his eyes to be greeted by All Might's face in his face. Izuku immediately began to scream. All Might rose up with a billowing laugh as Izuku scuttled backwards, panicking like any hero fanboy would when they met their biggest idol. Why? Well, at least it looks like you're moving around all right. Sorry about that back there. I didn't mean to make you get caught up in my justice NG. Usually, I pay more attention to keeping bystanders safe. But it turns out this city's sewer system is pretty difficult to navigate. Haha. The man smiled his ever-so-famous smile as Izuku just stuttered over and over. "Anyways, you were a big help, young man. Thanks to you, I've captured the evildoer." The man proudly showed Izuku the soda bottles in his jean pockets, which contained the slime villain that had almost murdered the freckled boy earlier. Izuku ignored that fact though. He couldn't believe All Might was here. Was he going insane? That had to be it, right? But just in case. Holy CRP. I gotta get an autograph. I gotta have a pen around here somewhere. Izuku mumbled aloud, throwing his backpack off his shoulder and rummaging around in it, bringing out a pen and a notebook, both most certainly obtained legally. "Yes. Please, All Might, sign my notebook." Izuku pleaded as he flicked to where he remembered writing his notes on Mount Lady. He flicked to the page after and gaped, "Why, you already signed it." "Oh my god. Thank you so much." He was extremely glad, but Kaken reminded him how he would die in a year, or much sooner if he had his way and Izuku wasn't such a coward. Maybe he could give it to some kid before he killed himself. If they were as big of an All Might fan as he is, then they would be sure to appreciate and take care of it. I gotta take this guy to the police so they can take care of him. Stay out of trouble. See you around. All Might saluted the small boy before beginning to stretch, preparing for takeoff. Just before the man took off, Izuku made a last-second decision. All Might looked back to see the green-haired child clutching onto his leg, and immediately began to freak out. Hey. What do you think you're doing? Let go. I love my fans, but this is too much. All Might spluttered as he tried to knock him off, not realizing how idiotic that was until Izuku brought it to his attention. You do realize that if I let go now, I will die, right? The man seemed surprised. Izuku took this as sudden realization, but it was actually more the child's quick personality change. Oh, that's a good point. All Might realized as Izuku mentally facepalmed, his hands too busy clutching onto the man's leg. You could let go now. Katsuki whispered in his mind, look at yourself, clutching onto All Might's leg. I thought you didn't want to be a burden, Deku? Why are you being a burden? I just have something I need to ask you. It's far too important for me to move on without knowing the answer. I have been wondering about it since I was small. The boy suddenly stopped fanboying and spoke in a monotone, as if he wasn't dangling from a man's leg far too many feet in the air. Okay, yeah, I get it. Just keep your eyes and mouth shut. All Might sighed, and Izuku just nodded in reply, firmly shutting his mouth. All he could do now was wait and ignore Kaken's attempts to make him let go. Even if Kaken was always right now wasn't the time for that. When the two landed on the nearest rooftop, which happened to be 8 stories, despite there being a much shorter one right next door, Izuku let go of All Might's leg. The man seemed to hesitate for a moment, but began to talk. Not a very smart move. Bang on the door for a while, someone will let you in. All Might pointed to the door on the left bottom corner of the building. Now I have to go, see you on the flip side. He saluted once again as he prepared to take off. Once again. But sir, No, I don't have any time. All Might rejected him, just like everybody else had done. But you deserve that, You deserve to be rejected. Don't burden him with your sheet. He doesn't have to know. But I want T-. It doesn't matter what you want, stupid Deku. Are you really going to be a burden again? Is that what you want? If that's it, then go ahead. Just don't blame me when you F it up. And no, I don't want to be a burden, I just . If you don't want to be a burden, then let him go, dumbass. Stop wasting his time. You're stupid, but question doesn't matter anyway. You could never be a... Could I ever be a hero like you? Izuku screamed to block out Kaken's voice, screwing his eyes shut tight and angling his head towards the floor. He couldn't let bear to see the look on All Might's face after this, so he took all the chances he got to counter that. Even though I'm just an average nobody without any powers, could I ever hope to be just as great as you are someday? Izuku waited a while but didn't hear any answer. He raised his head and decided to peek through one eye. A skeletal figure was in All Might's place. Hey guys, remember that weird quirkless kid? What was his name again? We called him Deku, but I don't remember his real name. Katsuki, you knew him for years, right? What was that kid's name? Stop bringing up Izuku, dumbass. The past is the past. Oh, Izuku. That was his name. Now that I think about it, I think this is the first time you've ever called him by his N-. Shut the F up, idiot. Katsuki let off a few sparks in an attempt to intimidate his 2 lackeys. It seemed to work, until he realized the real reason why they froze up. Perfect. I like a skin suit with some fire. A voice behind Katsuki cackled. Excuse me, but who are you? Izuku asked in a cautious tone. This could be a villain with a transformation quirk. Maybe they knew Izuku was Rabbit and had noticed how his costume resembled All Might? They were smart, he'd give them that. They're not smart, you're just the idiot who modeled your costume after the man. It's obvious you idolize him, Deku. Of course they're gonna turn that against you. After he didn't receive a response immediately, he asked once again, you are obviously not All Might, so what is your true identity? I assure you, young man, I am. All me . The skeleton was suddenly interrupted by spitting up his own blood. It was gross. But Izuku made sure to keep his poker face. He couldn't show any signs of weakness to the villain. How do you know it's not All Might? You don't trust him? I thought he was your idol? Thus, I'm always right and I say that's All Might. But Kaken . But Kasiachin. Do you really want to be a burden? Don't waste his time. He's a pro hero, he doesn't have the time to answer all your questions. You obviously can't be a hero anyways. If you are All Might, please, answer my question. Answer it and I'll leave you alone. Please. Now you're blackmailing him? Kaken, how am I dash? Who would want to be cursed with your presence? Deku? Kaken's voice was cut off by All Might's answer. Pro heroes are always having to risk their lives. Some villains just can't be bitten without powers. So no, I honestly don't think you can be a hero without a quirk. Izuku didn't respond, and All Might continued to talk as he began to walk towards the door that led to the staircase. If you want to help people, there's plenty of other ways to do it. You can become a police officer. They get CRP because the heroes capture most of the villains, but it's a fine profession. All Might began walking away, opening the door to leave, but looking back to deliver one final blow. It's not bad to have a dream, young man, just make sure your dreams are obtainable, realistic, understand. And with that, All Might closed the door and left the green-haired boy alone, only kept company by his own thoughts, and Kaken's voice screaming at him that not even All Might believed he could be a hero. He could almost hear the other boys' explosions. After a while, Izuku suddenly realized. Those explosions weren't just in his head. Izuku began running towards the scene, but Kaken's voice caused him to slow down. What's the point, Deku? All Might said you couldn't be a hero. What more do you need? There's no point taking notes on hero fights anymore. Kaken was right. But even if he couldn't be a hero, he could still be a vigilante. Before Kaken could even protest Izuku, the boy had ducked into an alleyway and pulled on his rabbit mask, before throwing on his hoodie. Blocking out Kaken's voice, he ran back out of the alleyway and into the Tuin shopping district, where the sludge villain from before was on an absolute rampage, but now he had fire? But didn't All Might capture him? Obviously you made him drop the bottles, dumbest Deku. At least he thought he blocked out Kaken's voice. Izuku sighed in frustration. He guessed he just felt too shitty to be strong enough to ignore Kaken completely right now. He just hoped he could still concentrate in some manner so he could save whoever was trapped inside the monster, given the conversation going on beside him. Why aren't the heroes doing anything? A man asked the person next to him. Seems like the villain caught a middle schooler with an explosion quirk. Most of the heroes' quirks aren't compatible with the flames, so they can't go in to save him. He replied. You hear that, Deku? Not even the heroes can beat this guy. You can't do shit. Izuku almost believed Kaken for a second, but then he caught a glimpse of who was actually trapped within the sludge villain. The real Kaken. Before Izuku could think of a plan, he was already running into the midst of the rampage, despite the yells of pro-heroes from behind him. He also heard a couple of shouts of recognition from a few people in the crowd, which may or may not have made him blush under his mask. But that didn't matter right now. Izuku threw his backpack off his shoulder and reached into it. He grabbed his notebook and threw it at the monster's eye. It yelped in pain and loosened its grip on Kaken, who lurched forward and had a small coughing fit. Izuku dropped his bag back on the ground as he was running so he could have both hands to pull Kaken out of the villain's grasp. The blonde boy continued to cough as Izuku put him on his back and began to run towards the heroes, grabbing his bag on the way. He deposited Kaken into Kamui Wood's arms, before hissing, "Get him to a hospital. UBSTRDS should all be ashamed." Izuku turned back around to deal with the villain, but All Might was already performing a Detroit smash. Izuku just grumbled as he ran away before the heroes had a chance to recognize him, mostly due to some of the crowd still cheering for him. After what had just occurred, Izuku decided that he no longer liked heroes. I'm sorry that bit was a kinda underwhelming, y'all. That bit was such a goddamn pain XD. Author-chan 2 hearts 2 hearts 2 hearts. Katsuki was confused. Everything was going so fast today. He had been reminded of Izuku by his a-hole lackeys, then captured by a dumbass sludge villain, saved by a vigilante while the pro-heroes just stood there, and questioned by the police. The most alarming part was the vigilante. He had thrown a notebook into the villain's eye, and Katsuki had noticed what was written on the cover. Hero analysis for the future. Katsuki ended up doing some research on the vigilante, who was apparently named Rabbit, according to some of the extras in the crowd. There wasn't many clear pictures of the vigilante, but he found one. The vigilante had green eyes, barely visible green curls. He'd had to zoom in to notice them, and a costume that was very obviously inspired by All Might. Katsuki had no doubt about it. Rabbit was Izuku. But wasn't Izuku dead? Or at least missing. Had he been this vigilante for 4 years? And why did he run away in the first place? Izuku was on the same rooftop he had sat on with Eraserhead on the 16th. It was another quiet night, but Izuku was glad about that. He really didn't have the strength to fight right now. He'd used the last of it during his second encounter with the sludge villain earlier. Eraserhead seemed to be having a quiet night as well, because he sat down next to the vigilante a while after. They sat in silence once again for a while, but soon Eraserhead decided to start up a conversation. Your mask resembles All Might's smile. Is that because he's your idol or something? Is this revenge for still annoying you a few nights ago, even when I said I wouldn't? Maybe. Izuku bit his lip, before sighing, All Might isn't really my idol anymore. But I still want to save people with a smile. I want to do what he never did for me. And what he'll never do for any of these people either. I can't really smile anymore, but I can pretend to. I'll pretend for them. That's all I can do. Pretend I'm something I'm not. Pretend I'm not just a weak, worthless Deku. I'll pretend for them because the heroes won't even pretend to care. No offense, Eraser, but I'm not particularly fond of heroes. Why do you hate heroes? The man questioned the boy further. Now, Eraser. I can't spill everything in one go. What do you take me for? I can't go handing out free interrogations. Maybe another day, but for now, I bid you farewell. The boy gave Eraserhead a somewhat polite smile under his mask, before bowing. When he rose up once more, he slid down the pipe on the building's side and hopped away, leaving Eraserhead in the dust. A couple of nights later, they found themselves sitting next to each other once more. Once again, Eraserhead was the one to start up the conversation. Why are you a vigilante? Are you really so bored that you want to hear my goddamn life story or something? It's just been something I've been wondering about. For a couple of years. I thought I should finally ask, since there's nothing else to talk about. Izuku didn't really know why he trusted the man, but sighed and decided to tell him anyway. I've been in the foster care system since I was 6. My BSTRD of a dad left and my mom decided to kill herself a few weeks after. Was thrown around the foster system till I was 10 and ran away. Why did you run away? He wanted to tell him about how he was being a burden, but he couldn't take any chances concerning Eraserhead connecting Rabbit and Izuku Midoriya. Let's just say, my foster families weren't the nicest people. Izuku grumbled, I deserved it though. They didn't accept me, so I ran to not trouble them with my presence anymore. I didn't want them to keep having to suffer because they had me around. I decided that the only way I could be useful to the world was if I became a vigilante, as I obviously couldn't become a hero. Why can't you become a hero? And I thought you hated heroes? It's complicated. Izuku muttered as he stood up and began to walk away, and not all heroes are bad. You're pretty alright. He finished before jumping off the roof and sliding down his new best friend, the building's pipe. Shoyuta was sitting with Rabbit. He was about to ask him another question, since it seemed to be something they did now. But Rabbit began to talk before he could even think about what he should ask. I always thought that All Might was going to save me. That one day, I'd be getting beaten by Dad, and All Might would burst through the door and punch him into next week, like, bam, pow. Rabbit demonstrated by punching the air in front of him, before his hand returned to clutching the edge of the roof. When my dad left, I hoped that maybe All Might caught him. That he'd saved me. But I knew that wasn't true. And when my mom killed herself, I thought, if All Might really had caught my dad, then maybe he hadn't saved me. Because even though my dad abused both me and my mom, he made her happy. I hoped when I went into the system that I could be happy. And that went so well, didn't it? Rabbit sighed, frowning under his mask, though Shoyuta could barely tell. I wanted him to save me. But he never did. I suffered for so. But he was never going to save me. Nobody was going to save me. So I saved myself. Heroes don't care about stopping RPE, or drag deals, or saving little kids who are being abused. All they care about is money and fame. The other day, I had to save a middle schooler because the heroes apparently didn't have compatible quirks. Most heroes are absolute bullshit. Except you and a select few, obviously. What made you decide to tell me this, Rabbit? Shoyuta asked the boy, who shrugged. You said you wanted to know why I hate heroes. So there you are. Rabbit got up before jumping off, as he always did. The name Rabbit was fitting, he'd give the vigilante that. A couple of weeks later, Shoyuta and Rabbit were sitting on the rooftop once again. It was practically routine now. On quiet nights, Shoyuta would ask Rabbit a question and Rabbit would answer. But sometimes, Rabbit would butt in. This was another one of those nights. Hey, Rabbit Dash. You can call me Deku if you want. We're close enough by now, aren't we, Eraser? Is that your name? No, it's a nickname. It was actually gonna be my vigilante name, but I'm glad the public came up with one for me first. It didn't come to mind that the person who gave me the nickname would figure out my identity pretty damn and quick. I guess in a sense, the people I saved also saved me. If they hadn't given me the name Rabbit, I'd probably be rotting away in juvie right now, or the system again. It's a nickname? So it's related to your real name. Don't get your hopes up, Eraser. Even if you figure out my real name, you won't know my family name, and I bet there's a bunch of kids with my name out there. But probably not that many in the system. Oh wow, Eraser. I'm so scared. You're being sarcastic, but I don't think you should have trusted me with your nickname that is most likely almost the same as your name, knowing kids. The latest you could have gotten this nickname is like, what, 10? 10-year-olds aren't the smartest when it comes to nicknames. Nah, I think it was fine to trust you. Why would that be, Rabbit? Because I don't think you're smart enough to figure it out. Is that a challenge? Depends how you see it, Eraser. The boy visibly smirked under his mask before jumping up and sliding down the building on a pipe that ran down its side, something he had become quite skilled at over the years, another thing Shoyuta would give the vigilante. Shoyuta decided to skip out on his little meetup with Rabbit that night. Rather than spending the quiet night with the vigilante, he went to the station and tried to find Midoriya's file. Given that he was quite sure the boy lived in Mustafu, it only took Shoyuta a couple of minutes to find him. Name, Midoriya, Izuku. DOB, 15.7.21XX. Age, 15. Last seen when he was 9. Generation, 5D. Mother, deceased, died when child was 6. Father, estranged, left when child was 6. Quirk, quirkless. Status, missing, presumed dead. Previously in the system. Foster homes, 17. Most recent/current foster home, the Furukawas. There wasn't much information about the boy himself past that, though there were a multitude of incident reports of the boy's wrongdoings, which Shoyuta decided to look through another day, given how many there were. The boy had a large amount of photos though. From 6 to 9, there was the same amount of photos as foster homes the boy had been through. The boy's expression in the first picture made him seem an excitable and happy child. But with each picture his expression became more and more barren, the boy increasingly becoming void of emotion. Quite a few of the pictures had the boy covered in burns, yet there were no incident reports confirming that the boy had been bullied or abused as far as Shoyuta could tell. Only ones about him being the perpetrator of the abuse and/or bullying. Shoyuta sighed. He'd certainly come across something special. His file barely provided any positive insight on the child. But one thing caught Shuta's attention. Quirk, quirkless. That was why the boy referred to himself as a burden. Because he was probably treated as one ever since his diagnosis. Shoyuta bit his lip for a moment, before putting his head in his hands and sighing. If you have a weak or villainous quirk, or maybe no quirk at all like Midoriya, you were practically screwed. That's just how it is, and how it always would be. The discrimination would only get worse with each generation. Shoyuta sighed once again. Society could be the worst sometimes. It is 1 a.m. and insomnia is a beach, so I'm writing and I suddenly realized that Izuku is younger than he's meant to be. So why let's just pretend that Izuku is totally 15, bad writing, I know, I'm sorry. I've gone back to the previous chapter and fixed it. Also, the slime villain attack happened in July rather than April just so Aizu has a bunch of shit hit him at once, smiley face. As you know, I'm very nice, author-chan 2 hearts 2 hearts 2 hearts. Why'd you skip out on me yesterday, Razor? I waited ages for you. Izuku pouted under his mask. He had been a bit sulky for most of the day because the man had left him waiting on the rooftop, even though it was one of the quietest nights they'd had in the while. Usually, they had an hour or so to sit together before the criminals in the area began to roam once again, but the entire night had been crime-free yesterday. What possibly could have kept him so busy the entire night that he couldn't even sit with Izuku for 5 minutes? I was looking for Midoriya's file. Well, at least tell me next time. I don't have the time to just sit here, you know? Oh, and what's so important that limits the amount of time you have to just relax? You don't have to be a vigilante, but you choose to. If you chose to spend that time relaxing like a normal child, then maybe you would have the time to sit and wait for me, or sit and chat with me for longer than we already do. Is this your way of trying to convince me to stop being a vigilante? Izuku didn't even bother phrasing it as a question. He already knew the answer. Yes. Well, it's not working. And anyway, you have a job, Razor. You can't just sit here talking to me all the time when you could be saving people. So you want to stop having our chats? No. That's what I thought. The two sat there for a while, but Izuku suddenly started feeling like a hypocrite, seeing as he previously said he didn't have the time to just sit here, so he blurted out, "Why don't you ever arrest me? You know, when we're just sitting together. The last 4 years you've been so hell-bent on catching me, but now you seem to not even care about that anymore. Did you suddenly get bad at your job or something? Well, you're not doing anything illegal when you're just sitting and talking to me." What? Eraserhead sighed. "Look, kid. As much of a brat you may be, you don't deserve over 4 years' worth of acts of vigilantism on your record, whoever's record that may be. If I happen to catch you while you're committing one of those acts of vigilantism, that's your own fault. But right now, you're just a kid who needs some serious mental help, or at least somebody to talk to. Which is what I'm here for, at least during those moments where I'm not meant to be taking you down to the station. I was about to say thank you, but then you practically said I'm broken, so now I'm saying you, Razor. And then I'm saying thank you. You're welcome, Deku." Katsuki was not expecting to be on a midnight stroll and hear his childhood best friend's victim's nickname. But here he was. On a midnight stroll. Hearing "You're welcome, Deku" coming from the top of an apartment building. The ash-blonde boy spotted a fire escape on the side of said building and began to dash over, before climbing its ladders 2 rungs at a time. He heard the same voice who mentioned Izuku's nickname grumble out, "Rabbit, somebody's coming." Katsuki was right. Rabbit was Izuku. And Izuku was letting this BSTRD call him Deku. He reached the top of the fire escape and jumped onto the roof to be greeted by Izuku and some hobo with a white scarf on. "You shitty nerd. Where the F have you been the past 5 years?" Katsuki yelled. He didn't miss how the boy's emerald eyes gained a glint of fear, but he was too sad to be bothered about that right now. Kakak dash. Shut the f*** up. Do you know how f***ing worried I was when you just up and disappeared? I thought you were dead. I thought you listened to my effing advice. But here you are, hanging out with some f***ing hobo who's also calling you Deku. What, is anybody you've known for 5 f***ing seconds allowed to call you that now? Kakanadash. Tell me why the F you left or I'll reveal your identity to this BSD. Katsuki threatened and the smaller boy seemed to collapse in on himself. The hobo began to talk rather than Izuku. "I'd prefer it if you wouldn't threaten Rabbit. Nor call me a BSTRD. Katsuki scoffed. "I see it as a pretty FNG accurate description of ya, asshat." The hobo nudged Izuku and when he didn't respond, the older man raised an eyebrow at Katsuki. "Geez, what the hell did you do to him, other than threaten him?" Usually if somebody said something like that, he'd either be shouting at them or delivering an idiotic comeback. The hobo sighed before nudging the paling Izuku a few more times, still getting no response. Katsuki still hadn't been exactly sure if he'd won or lost when the hobo wrapped his scarf around Izuku and began jumping across the rooftops. What? All Katsuki could do was yell out, "Deku," but it obviously fell to deaf ears. So, I couldn't exactly write much more as that part was in Katsuki's perspective, but as soon as they were a block or so away from Katsuki, Aizu snapped out of it, wiggled out of the scarf and ran away, as he's used to the scarf from when he's Midoriya and not Rabbit. Author-chan 2 hearts 2 hearts 2 hearts. So, Are you going to tell me what that was the other night? No, definitely not. I never, ever want to talk about how much Kaken scares me. Ah, alright then. We can talk about something else though if you want to. Okay then, here's a conversation topic. Why the F are you so short? I'm not short, you're just tall as F dash dot. Rabbit, I have 15 and 16-year-olds for students. You're like, what, 15 yourself? You should be maybe an inch or so shorter than the average height of my students, but you're a good deal shorter than that. Don't cheat on me 'cause I'm short. Ain't my FA fault. Eraserhead smirked slightly. You know, from your notes, you seemed like a pretty alright kid, but now I've realized that you're just a brat. And from your notes, you seemed like you had at least one considerate bone in your body, but now I've realized that you're actually just in butt. Eraserhead gave him a smack to the head, but Izuku just laughed, knowing it wasn't out of spite. They sat there for a little while, and as much as Izuku despised wasting time, he had to admit that sitting with Eraserhead was surprisingly nice. Kaken's voice dimmed to a whisper, but that at least gave Izuku the opportunity to just take in the sights and sounds of Mustafu, even if he liked the comfort of his childhood friend's voice. Sure, Kaken was terrifying in person, but Izuku could handle the boy's insults and slurs, playful banter in his head. In his head. Hey, you know the other night before Kaken came? Eraserhead simply gave a hum in response. You said that I'm a kid who needs some serious mental help. Do you really think I'm broken, Razor? The man bit his lip and Izuku's eyes widened. Even your idol thinks you're broken. You're broken, 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 you're not broken. Just cracked, you know? And you might shatter, sure, but even if you shatter, we can still piece you back together. As long as you don't let yourself be grinded into dust. They both sat in silence for a while, before Izuku burst out into a fit of laughter, crying as he did so. Razor, you can be so cheesy, you'd never think it by looking at you, but then you pull sheet like this dash. Eraserhead seemed as if he was about to retort back, so Izuku was quick to continue, but even so... Thanks. You didn't have to say that. You're welcome, Deku. So, Razor, I have a hypothetical question. Like, totally out of the blue, not relating to anybody in particular at all. Shoot. Izuku didn't exactly want to shoot. He'd spent ages mulling over the fact of asking the question. He was apprehensive about it, but it was something he felt he needed a second opinion on. Do you think, if I was a quirkless person, I could become a hero? Eraserhead answered almost immediately, barely even thinking about it. Of course. I practically fight quirkless. If I thought you couldn't be, then I'd be a hypocrite. Why do you ask? Do you think you couldn't be a hero if you were quirkless? Because you can't. No. I'm actually super glad you think the quirkless can be heroes. I was honestly expecting a totally different answer. But are you sure this question is completely hypothetical? Eraserhead raised an eyebrow at him. Of course. I was just interested in your opinion. You could have just asked if I thought a quirkless person could be a hero. Didn't have to make it a whole big deal about it. Oh, shut up, Razor. Izuku shot back, pouting, though obviously Eraserhead wouldn't be able to see. Shoyuta found that Rabbit was just like Izuku Midoriya. An enigma. He originally thought that Rabbit was the epitome of cockiness and confidence, and sure he was a little cracked, as Shoyuta had told the boy a few nights later, but nowhere near the shattered aspect. When he had to drag the frozen child away from Kaken, or whatever the hot-headed boy's real name was, he realized the child may be closer to shattered than he thought. So he told the boy that if he shattered, he'd help piece him back together. But, honestly, Shoyuta didn't know how to do that. For one, the child was still a wanted vigilante. You couldn't exactly just put a criminal in therapy without them getting arrested. And since Shoyuta didn't know the boy's true identity, there wasn't really much he could do. All he could do was continue his chats with the vigilante, but anybody would tell you that Shoyuta isn't exactly the comforting type. And he didn't really know enough about the boy's situation to do anything. All he knew is that the boy was put through the system and ran away when he was 10. All he had mentioned other than that was that his foster families weren't the nicest people and that they didn't accept him, so he freed them of his presence. Shoyuta didn't know what to make of Rabbit. All he knew was that the kid needed help. And though he would still try his hardest to help Midoriya, he'd make sure Rabbit got the help he needed too. Izuku had to admit, Eraserhead definitely wasn't like any other hero. He believed most heroes to be selfish assholes who only cared about money and fame, but Eraserhead was the exact opposite. He stuck to the shadows and preferred not to be in the spotlight, so he didn't seem to care for the money and fame side of the business, which Izuku respected him for. Sure, Eraserhead could be a bit of an butt, but in a good way. It wasn't as if he was causing tons of property damage and wasn't showing any compassion towards those caught in the crossfire, like a certain fiery hero. Eraserhead just preferred to stick to logic and reason, and therefore be a stick in the mud, but he could also be but in a fun way. Usually by complete accident, but still. He was nice to talk to though. It was surprisingly comforting. You could be spending that time training. The man may not know how to be comforting, like, at all, but just his presence was more than enough. What if somebody is in trouble right now? You can't waste your time just sitting here. Even if they didn't talk, it still gave Izuku the strength to keep going. He wouldn't let himself die by another's hands. They're just ridding the world of a burden. He would die on his own terms. So he could do at least one useful thing in his life. But you've been wasting time on that roof. He wouldn't die until he could be useful. Somebody could be dead because of you. He wouldn't. Your mother died because of you. She wouldn't. Shizuka-san almost died because of you. Didn't you hear her fighting with Yoichi outside your door? And losing? If you hadn't been so weak, she wouldn't have had to suffer. Every single second you waste, somebody could be dying. And it would be all fault. So many people could be dead because of him. And it was all his fault. He knows this. Because Kaken is always right. Izuku was tired. He hadn't slept in 3 days. But you have to keep going. If he wasted time sleeping, people would die. It would be all his fault. At least if he died from overworking himself, he was doing something useful. But it still isn't enough. But it still wasn't enough. Izuku was exhausted. He hasn't slept in 5 days. Everything was almost a blur as he put his all into fighting and capturing each and every villain or criminal that came his way. But his all wasn't enough. You're making mistakes. Because he hadn't slept. That's no excuse. That was no excuse. You have to keep going. He had to keep going, until it was finally enough. But it would never be enough. Had it been a week already? Izuku couldn't tell. Eraserhead could tell though. Where have you been, Rabbit? The man asked Izuku. He hadn't seen Eraserhead since his revelation. Since Kaken had revealed the truth to him. Busy. Not right now, Eraserhead. He grumbled out and went to run off, but the man caught his wrist. Hey, get off me, Eraserhead. Izuku growled at the man, who gave him a frown. There's barely any crime tonight. There are other heroes in the area taking care of it. Why don't you just rest for one night? All I've heard about for the past week and a half, it had been longer than a week, is that there's been non-stop rabbit sightings. You're going to catch the attention of the more popular heroes, who will not hesitate to arrest you on the spot. The man glared at him. I don't care, Eraserhead. I'm not going to let people die because I wasn't there. Izuku shot back at the man. What? My mom killed herself because I wasn't there for her. And my only good foster parent almost died trying to protect me from her own husband. Single. Because I was too weak to protect myself. I have to be strong, and I have to be there for those who have nobody. I need to be the light in their life that they'll never have. I need to be able to smile in the face of danger one day, without having to use this mask to do it. You say there's other heroes in the area? They're not here to protect these guys. They're after me. I'm the only person here who cares about these guys. I care about them, Deku. No, nobody does, only I care about them, Who do you think was protecting the area before you came along, Deku? Izuku didn't answer him, but he knew the answer. Eraserhead knew that he knew. It was me. It was hard on my own, so sure, I appreciate your help, but I know how hard this area can be sometimes. And I can tell you haven't gotten any sleep since you started pushing yourself to the brim constantly. Go get some rest, Deku, because if you keep protecting these people, sure, it won't be them who die, but it'll be you. I don't care if I d-dash. These people won't die, Deku, I'll make sure of it. And I'll make sure you won't die either. You're technically one of these people as well. Don't kill yourself to save these people. Izuku bit his lip. He had already tried to kill himself for far less, but Eraserhead didn't exactly know that. Eraserhead also had a good point. He didn't want to admit it, but the man did have a good point. If Eraserhead was there, then nobody. Before Kaken had the chance to intervene, Kaken's voice had been granted talking privileges during his patrols as he was the only person who kept Izuku on the right path. Izuku nodded. If you're gonna keep beaching about me taking care of myself, then fine, I will. Glad you finally decided to actually take care of yourself. Eraserhead grumbled at the boy who began to yawn. He'd been stifling them because they made him just want to pass out in the alleyway he was in, but he was distracted by the hobo-like man. Why are you following me, Razor? Izuku asked about a block away from Dagboa. He had noticed the man a while ago, but he had decided to give him the benefit of the doubt until now. To make sure you actually get home safe. You don't need to make sure I get home safe, Razor. I'll be perfectly fine on my own. Izuku muttered as he continued to walk, too tired to bother breaking out into a sprint now that he'd bothered to acknowledge his current condition. Surprised you're not running away. Surprised you're back to being in butt. Where's that nice Razor from a second ago that actually gave a shit about me? I do give a shit about you. I'm making sure you get home safe. You're trying to find out where I live. No. See, Razor? I know you well. Keep patrolling. You said you were gonna protect these people, right? I'm protecting one of them right now. DM it, Razor. I don't need protection. You haven't slept in a week and a half. You're not even running away from me right now. Of course you need protection. How can you tell how long it's been since I last slept? Considering the facts that me, of all people, should know the signs of sleep deprivation, and that you've been seen during the day recently, which I assume is when you'd sleep, yeah, I don't think you've slept. Though that brings up another question. You said you ran away, right? So you don't go to school? Do you still bother to keep up with your education? PFFFFT, of course I keep up with my education. I know how to build support items, lockpick, shoplift dash, deca dash. Kidding, Razor, kidding. I also know history, science, math, English, etc. I can teach myself, you know? Don't need some dumb teacher. He muttered teacher as if they were one of the most disgusting things to ever exist, because to him, they were, been fine for over 5 years doing it. The fact that you said also is worrying. That was the effect I desired. Izuku cockily grinned beneath his mask. They stopped at Dagboa Municipal Beach. As they walked down the steps to the junk-littered shorefront, Eraserhead looked confused. But as they approached Izuku's tiny clothing pile, mattress, and support item box, the man realized. Holy shit. You live here. Izuku began to laugh. Duh. What else did you expect, dumbass? Ah yes, a kid who ran away is going to be living in some luxury apartment in the rich part of Mustafu. Yeah, no. So, how long have you been living on the beach? Almost 5 years. Slept in alleyways for a while till I found this place. Nobody comes here. It's safe. The boy muttered in reply. A junk-littered beach isn't safe, Deku. Any of these piles could collapse onto you at any moment. But they haven't. But they could. But they won't. But, Razor, I've been doing this for 5 years. I can tell if one of the piles is getting a bit unstable. If they are, I just try to stabilize them or move to a different part of the beach. It's fine, Razor. I'm fine. If you say so, Eraserhead murmured. The man probably knew he wasn't going to win this one. If Izuku gave in, there was no chance of it happening again on the same night. But it didn't mean the man wasn't going to try again with a different topic. I know why you need to know the other stuff, but why do you need to know how to pick locks? Oh my god, Razor, can't you just leave me alone? Izuku groaned. Never. Fine, dumbass. I pick the locks of restaurant dumpsters. If they're just gonna throw the food away anyways, might as well eat it. That's disgusting. It's practical. No, it's not that you'll get sick. But I haven't yet. That's what we call a miracle, but it won't last forever. Well too. It's lasted 5 years, of course it'll last forever. I'm not going to win this one, am I? No. You'll never win this argument. My reasoning is sound. Izuku's reasoning didn't turn out to be very sound, because he got sick. He guessed the not sleeping combined with trash food worked against him somehow. But he wasn't going to let some sickness stop him from doing his job. He may let an eraser stop him though. He just had to hope that luck would be on his side tonight, other than the being sick thing. If he ran into Eraserhead, he'd be screwed. Luck didn't turn out to be a team player. You're sick, Rabbit? Came the man's tired voice from behind him after Izuku sneezed. I'm not. The boy sniveled. Yes, you are. You shouldn't be out. Should be. Gotta protect everyone. By getting them sick too? Nope. Got mask on. They be fine. You won't be fine. I'm always fine. You always say that, but you never are. Go home, or go to your beach. Thanks for the advice, but Sniff don't need to. I'll be fine. Izuku began to walk away, but face planted onto the floor. You're not fine. I'm not fine. Eraserhead sighed behind him, and before Izuku could question the underground hero, he'd been lifted into the air and onto the man's back. What you doing, Razor? Izuku growled at the man, but did not hesitate to grab onto him for dear life. I'm taking you to my apartment. No, you ain't. Yes, I am. Don't trust you enough for that. And you shan't trust me with your address. Eraserhead was silent for a moment, before nodding, yeah, true. Shoyuta didn't particularly want to just bring Rabbit to Dagboa, but he didn't have much choice. The most he knew about Rabbit's trauma for now was that he didn't particularly like loud people, like the Kakin from before. His husband was the epitome of loud. He got to the small hidden-away area Rabbit had made in the trash and frowned as he looked around it once more. The mattress had springs sticking out and had clearly been used for far longer than any mattress should be used. The clothes were clean, but very clearly stitched up. It was obvious that the boy's vigilante costume was his most acceptable outfit by far, and that is an outstanding accomplishment, given how the costume looks. There wasn't much else, other than a sewing kit, a first aid kit, and the box of support items from before, mostly stick-like objects, batons. He guessed those were the rejects of the vigilante's weapon. He laid the kid down on the bare mattress. No blankets or anything. It was currently November. The kid must have been freezing every winter for 5 years. It hurt Shoyuta. He had tried to help Rabbit a lot throughout the past couple of months since their conversation about Izuku being broken, not shattered, through just being there for him, but it was nowhere near enough. He put the small boy down on the mattress. He was small because he was malnourished, Shoyuta now realized. Hey, I need to head to my apartment to get you some stuff. Don't move, all right? Far as I know, can't move at all. Rabbit grunted in response. Shoyuta quickly set off to his and Hizashi's apartment. He should be on patrol right now, but Rabbit was more important at the moment. He walked in and immediately went for the hallway closet. What are you doing home already, Sho? Hizashi asked worriedly from the living room Shoyuta had dashed through. I thought your patrol lasted until 2 a.m. tonight? It does, but this brat I know is sick because he's an absolute idiot, and now I have to make sure he doesn't die. Shoyuta grumbled back. Why didn't you just bring him here? Hizashi questioned him once again. He's scared of loud people. Shoyuta replied once more as he just decided to grab an armful of blankets from the closet and steal a pillow from there. Bet that he could always grab another one at the store after he'd dealt with Rabbit. He didn't want to make the kid wait longer than he had to. He picked up a jelly packet on his way out of the apartment as well. He didn't have any real food. He was still mad at Hizashi for saying that his jelly packets weren't real food, but this would have to do for now. When he arrived back at Dagboa, Rabbit was exactly as he was before Shoyuta had left. The man just sighed. I didn't mean remain in that exact position, Rabbit. I meant just, don't get up. You said not move. I just did what you said. The boy quickly defended himself. Shoyuta sighed once more. That wasn't exactly what he said, but he probably shouldn't give Rabbit a Japanese lesson right now. Well, I need you to lift your head real quick. Shoyuta asked the boy. When the child did just that, Shoyuta put the pillow under his head before laying the myriad of blankets on top of him. Think even if I weren't sick I wouldn't be able to move. This your way of capturing me? Rabbit asked, raising an eyebrow. No. This is just what my husband Hitoshi does to me whenever I'm sick. Shoyuta sighed back. How many times had he sighed in the last minute? Rabbit seemed to tense up when Shoyuta mentioned Hitoshi, but the man decided not to push it for now. I got you one of these too. Shoyuta placed the jelly packet on Izuku's chest. So, yeah, you might want to get up to drink that. Okay, but turn around. Have to take my mask off to drink and don't want you seeing my face. The boy requested. Shoyuta obliged, since it only made sense, given that the boy was a vigilante. When the boy was finished, Shoyuta practically forced him to sleep. It took until he threatened to get midnight to come for the boy to finally give in. The man sighed as he read the multitude of notifications he had received from Hitoshi. Radio Rebel. Shoyuta, what's going on? How's the kid? Are you both okay? Please respond. I'm worried. Pencil Topper. I'm fine. Kid is asleep right now. I checked his forehead, he's got a fever. He practically lives off trash, so I'm not surprised. He lives in it too. I'm thinking about just giving him the blankets I brought. I've already decided to give him the DMN pillow. Radio Rebel. Oh, Shoyuta, you're so nice. He lives off and in trash? That's horrible. No child should have to live like that. Maybe we should start bringing him food or something every now and then. So he's not only eating trash? Shoyuta bit his lip. It did sound like a good idea, and that was a rare thing for Hitoshi. How could he pass up this opportunity? Izuku soon began routinely finding plastic containers full of food placed next to his mattress. He didn't question how, who, or why, and just ate it. He had a couple of theories in mind anyway. Y'all. There's your fluff for once. 3 Author-chan 2 hearts 2 hearts 2 hearts. Izuku was scared. Izuku was sitting in the office of one of the smartest beings in the world. The very office he was in was the principal's office of one of the most renowned schools in all of Japan. He was sitting in the principal's office of UA, in front of Nizu. Oh shit. So, you're Izuku Midoriya. You are attempting to get into our general studies course, correct? The chimera had a calm smile on his face, yet a glint of malice in his eyes. Izuku would say he knew that all too well, but this malice was strangely different. He couldn't figure out the dog-mouse bear's intent. Izuku just offered a nod, his poker face still remaining. Oh. It's nice to meet you, but it seems that you are a runaway. You are technically a part of the foster system, correct? Izuku nodded once again. He was going to fake his details, but he wouldn't risk lying to the smartest animal in the world. I also see that you are quirkless. Izuku nodded a third time at the mammal. Not very talkative, are you? Well, that makes sense, given your status in our society. You were probably seen as a subspecies, like I was. Though our situations were most likely very different, we were both treated in the same manner. Like we were worth less than everybody else just because of the lack of a quirk, or even having one. The human race is a strange one, but I feel a small connection with you, Midoriya-kun. Though I should turn you in, I'm not particularly fond of the government myself, so I'll allow you go to free, and also go to UA. It would be a grave mistake to give up a mind as great as yours, given your entrance exam scores. The mammal had a sheet-eating grin on his face. Izuku was silent for only a moment more while his eyes widened. Are you serious? He hated that he stuttered. He thought he'd gotten over that problem, given his confidence when he was Rabbit and the few conversations he'd had with Eraserhead as Izuku. Why wouldn't I be serious? This is quite the serious conversation we are having after all. Izuku bowed and muttered a quiet, thank you. Izuku was terrified. He was standing in front of the UA. Sure, he'd come here a few times, from his original deal with Nizu to receiving a complimentary uniform from the man, but it was still surreal to Izuku. His first few classes had been, for the most part. His classmates still didn't know he was quirkless, so it was a good start. They didn't talk to him. He'd heard one person call him creepy, but Izuku was fine with that. Izuku wasn't particularly fond of people anyway. So, When it came to lunch, Izuku couldn't handle the rush of students. He decided to go out to the back of the school to eat his lunch, which had been left beside his mattress once again. He still couldn't handle all of the food and either ended up saving it or giving it to others. He didn't expect to find another person sitting against the wall at the back of the school, eating his lunch in silence. Izuku stood there for about a minute, contemplating if he should intrude, before the purple-haired boy spoke up. "You can sit down, you know. You don't have to just continue standing there." Izuku immediately snapped out of it and hastily took a seat near the boy. He couldn't just sit right next to the mystery boy, obviously. They were complete strangers. The purple-haired boy was quite handsome though. Izuku snapped out of it once again. No, he wasn't gay. Not even bi. He was straight. Extraordinarily straight. He had been told many times he wasn't supposed to like guys, and that it only made him more useless. Yuichi didn't seem to mind when he found out. Izuku shook his head. Now wasn't the time to be thinking about that. "Are you alright?" The purple-haired boy asked. Well, not ask, he practically demanded an answer from Izuku. "And who even are you?" "Oh, I'm Izuku." He quickly spat out. "Izuku, is that all?" The other boys seemed to expect him to finish off his name. "I don't go by my last name." Izuku stuttered further. "Well, if you're Izuku, then I'm Hitoshi." Just Hitoshi? "If I only get your first name, you only get mine." That's fair. The two boys sat there for a while, just eating their lunch, until Hitoshi spoke again. "So, why are you back here?" The boy demanded another answer for him, and Izuku complied. "I couldn't handle the sea crowds." "Makes sense. They're insane. Both the hero course and general studies course together makes for quite the annoyance." Hitoshi muttered. "Which course are you in, Hitokuin?" Hitoshi seemed surprised at the sudden nickname, but didn't question it. He didn't really seem to like any sort of questions, as long as it was he who asked them. "I'm in the hero course." "I don't know which course you are in." I'm in general studies." "Oh, obviously." "It isn't that obvious." Hitoshi shrugged. "It would be if you really knew the BSRD. If you really knew me, you'd be disgusted. You'd agree that a burden like me could never be a hero. I wouldn't even be able to beat the weakest of people." It would be. How would it be obvious?" It's personal. Teach though why you'll probably hear about it the others find out. I'd rather hear it from you. Rumors are always over-exaggerated." Hitoshi wanted to know. Tell him how useless you are, He deserves to know. It's only right. I'm quirkless." He scrunched up his eyes as he spoke, preparing for Hitoshi to push him away. "Oh. Just oh? This, oh? Yeah. Why would you being quirkless go around as a rumor? Being quirkless is fine. Quirks are kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest." "Echa? I always thought quirks were amazing." "Not really. People get discriminated for both their quirk and lack of one. You probably had it pretty bad, but people with weak or villainous quirks would have gone through just as much." "Exactly. I don't deserve to feel bad. Others have gone through just as much as me. And you don't see them beaching about it, do you, Deku?" Izuku didn't deserve to feel bad. Hitoshi said being quirkless was fine. Maybe he should listen to the purple-haired boy. Hitoshi was wrong. Being quirkless wasn't fine. He shouldn't have listened to the other boy. In 5th PRD, the teacher, present Mike, Izuku totally wasn't fanboying, decided it would be fun to go around and ask about everybody's quirks. When it came to Izuku, he decided to tell them he was quirkless. It was UA, wasn't it? Maybe they'd all be as accepting as Hitoshi. A quirkless? At UA? EW? Hitoshi didn't say anything like that. "Do you think it's infectious?" "I'm not infectious. Being quirkless isn't a disease. Stay away from it." "Why?" "Can't believe we have a mistake in our class." "A mistake? He's gonna be such a burden. As soon as people find out we have a quirkless in our class, our reputation is gonna go down the drain." Burden. Izuku was right. He was a burden. A quirkless mistake. He regretted his decision to tell his class about him being quirkless, because he was now isolated. He was just a subspecies. A mistake. One that's slowly been going extinct over the years, each and every generation having less and less mistakes appearing as the new human race was perfected. He only had 3 months until he'd aid in the extinction of the quirkless. He could only hope that this time he would succeed. But for now, he needed a way to cure the pain he would most likely be feeling for the next 3 years. You deserve that pain. Izuku had stopped cutting when he ran away from his 17th foster home. Izuku began cutting again when he went back to school. That little bit felt a bit forced to me, but it wouldn't be or if it weren't angsty, smiley face. Y'all will get a fluff-only chapter at some point. Just not anytime soon, at least in the main FIC. Author-chan 2 hearts 2 hearts 2 hearts. Do you have Kakin in your class? I think that's a nickname, not their real name. Oh, alright. His end name is Kakatsuki Bakugo. Izuku ignored how weird the other boy's full name sounded coming out of his mouth. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow at him. Bakugo. The person you know in my class is Bakugo. Yeah, no, I can't imagine you two ever having a single conversation. I knew him when I was little. I haven't, spoke to him in a while. Liar. The rooftop incident, remember? I could barely spit anything out though. I couldn't even call him Kakin. All I could do was stutter my butt off. Hitoshi nodded. He seems like the sort of person who would have abandoned you as soon as he found out you were quirkless. Izuku gave the other boy a nod of his own. Why, technically I still saw him often. I have the scars to prove it. Hitoshi only nodded. He guessed that the boy knew Izuku didn't want to talk about it further. Or he was just bored of the topic. Either way, Izuku appreciated him for it. Teach, this is nice. Izuku muttered. Hitoshi only gave him a look that asked him to elaborate further. Over the last few days, he'd figured out that Hitoshi didn't particularly like asking questions with his voice, and if he had to, he wouldn't phrase it that way. People don't really accept me often, so it's pretty nice to have somebody to talk to. Eraserhead should be enough for you. Stop being selfish. Hitoshi bit his lip, seeming to contemplate something. He's getting ready to ditch you, Deku. You shouldn't have told him that, dumbass. Now he hates you cause he found out how much of a clingy bastard you are. You're so FNG worthless. Maybe it's good if he ditches you. You're wasting his goddamn time. He's a hero course student while you're just a lowly general studies course student, because you could never be. My quirk is brainwashing. If I ask somebody a question and they respond, I can brainwash them. That's why I avoid asking you questions. I'm not really accepted by people often as well, so it's nice to have you to talk to. Well, that's so cool, Hitoshi. Izuku exclaimed in excitement. You could do so much with that. You could brainwash a villain so they'd stop fighting you, you could easily stop hostage situations, or suicides. Don't stop me though, one person is annoying enough, you could dash. Stop, Izuku. Hitoshi chuckled. You're muttering. The curly-haired boy had already had a couple of muttering sprees over the past few days. Sorry. Izuku put his head in his hands. It's fine. Thanks, Aizu. Aizu. Izuku looked up at the other boy. Yeah, a nickname. Like how you call me Hito-kun. I like it, Izuku murmured. Thank you, Hito-kun. You thank me for everything. Do not. Izuku puffed his cheeks in a pout. You do. And another thing, the only times I ever hear you speak without stuttering is when you're on one of your muttering sprees, fanboying over the heroes who taught you that day. You're such a fanboy. Hitoshi teased. Hito-kun. Stop it. Izuku realized at that moment that he'd done something he never thought possible. He'd made a friend. He was enough for Hitoshi. And even though he knew in the end that he still had to go through with ridding the world of the burden that was Izuku Midoriya, he was glad that he had lived a little while longer. Because he was finally enough for someone. A trip? The hero course is going on a DMN trip? Yes, we're going to the USJ to do some training in the afternoon. Dude, I don't think you should be training at Universal Studios Japan right now. It's the unforeseen simulation joint, at least that's what 13 calls it. It's an isolated training ground on the UA campus built for rescue training, not a theme park. Okay, ignoring the fact that you know 13, do you really think you should be going to an isolated training ground right now, even if it's still on UA campus? Like, didn't you just have a break-in earlier today? It was just the press. It was all fine in the end. Somebody disintegrated the UA barrier. I don't think even the press would go that far. I have a bad feeling, Razor. It's going to be alright, Rabbit. It's not as if a villain will be able to break into UA. Rat Satan makes sure of that. Izuku decided to ignore his bad feeling for a moment. He had to ask how the hell Eraserhead had come up with the nickname, Rat Satan, for Nizu. Izuku decided to call in sick the next day. He was still going to UA that day though. Well, Rabbit was. The boy had clad himself in his vigilante uniform and used his student ID to get into the school. He was worried about Nizu figuring him out, but now wasn't the time to worry about himself. Both Hitoshi and Eraserhead could be in trouble. The only two people who give a DMN about him. Kaken wouldn't be in trouble, he would be able to beat any villain, but still. He needed to help them in some way. He had to be useful. Izuku quickly located the bus's location and opened the trunk before slipping inside. Sure, he could clutch onto the underside like any good vigilante would, but Izuku wasn't that talented. You're wrong about this. You're wrong about this. You're wrong about this. The voices in his head were fighting against him, telling him how much of an idiotic Deku he was being. How he was just going to waste the hero course's time. Waste Hitoshi's time. Waste Eraserhead's time. Waste my time. But Izuku had to be sure. He couldn't let down the people he loves. Because they were all he had. If they got hurt, he didn't know what he would do. As Izuku snuck into the USJ, he couldn't believe his olive green eyes. He shouldn't have been surprised at how vast and extravagant the USJ was, given how that was practically the definition of both UA and its motto, but it still shocked him. He watched as the space hero, he was seeing 13 in person, gave a speech to the students of Class 1A from one of the bushes next to the entrance of the USJ. Izuku attempted to guess each of the students' quirks based on their costumes, at least if they had emitter quirks and not obvious ones like the boy with a tail or the girl with earphone jacks hanging from her ears, or the person who was literally invisible. Though, while he was brooding about being unable to write a new entry in his notebook about the hero's quirk, an explanation of how it worked straight from the man himself, he didn't fail to notice the purple vortex that was slowly growing in front of the fountain. When it had grown quite a bit, a multitude of people began to emerge from it. Villains. As they continued to emerge, two particular figures caught Izuku's attention. A guy with pale blue hair who Izuku decided to dub HNDJB, given the fact that he was covered in hands. If they were fake or actual human hands, well, Izuku didn't want to know. The other one that caught Izuku's eye was a large, muscular, void-black figure covered in bright red surgery scars. It had a beak and two eyeballs nestled on top of its visible brain. Izuku felt like he wanted to throw up, but now wasn't the time for that. Huddle up and don't move. 13. Protect the students. Came a familiar voice. Eraserhead. Whoa, are there faux villains too? It's like the entrance exam all over again. Are they battle robots as well? Don't move. Those are real villains. Eraserhead replied, pulling down his goggles. He wasn't going to. As Eraserhead set off to fight the villains, despite a few protests from the students and 13 himself, Izuku jumped out from the bush and dashed into the fray. Who's that? Are they a villain too? No, look, they're helping Aizawa-sensei fight the villains. Deku. Are they a vigilante? Izuku ignored the comments from the students, but when he had fended off quite a few of the villains, one of the peculiar people, or whatever they were, he had noticed earlier seemed to notice him too. It's you! Handjob snarled. You're the one that keeps taking down all the NPCs we've been recruiting. Huh, go figure. Which ones were yours? That gang from when I was 10? That drag ring from when I was 12? Oh wait, there was also that drag ring from when I was 11. And that one from when I just turned 14. Oh, Timon, I've taken down a lot of drag rings. They were all mine, Rabbit. The man-child spat his vigilante alias as if it were the most disgusting thing to ever exist, They were my league's financial supply and you took them all down. I had to settle for these low-level NPCs. Wow, your underlings must have been super weak if a literal child could take him down, huh? If these are even weaker, then this'll be a piece of cake. Wow, you must be having a pretty bad time right now. Izuku smirked under his mask, before fiddling with his voice changer for a moment. Hiya, I'm Handjob and I'm so bad at being a villain that even a child could destroy my operation successfully. Wow, I really am a failure, huh? He heard a snicker from one of the students behind him, and Izuku counted that as a win. He was trying his darndest to make the situation just a little bit better for those students, after all. Izuku didn't mind that his comments would probably get him killed. No, scratch that, would most definitely get him killed. That Handjob had a murderous glint in his eyes and a mist man hurriedly tried to subdue him. Tamura Shigaraki, we are only here to kill all M-. Shut up, Kurogyari. Even if this isn't his brat, a dead kid is sure to catch All Might's attention and have him come running here. He can't have any of his precious hero students dying, just like this mistake will. Izuku's eyes widened for a moment, the insult leaving a little puncture that allowed Kaken's voice to slip through, however quiet it may be. Despite the real Kaken being there as well, he still listened to the voice in his head. To him, right now, that was the closest thing he had to the real Kaken. Izuku didn't notice Shigaraki launching at him. Izuku did notice Eraserhead jumping in front of him. Izuku couldn't do anything but watch as the man's elbow began to disintegrate in front of him. He looked around, looking for any sort of help, but 13 was busy and most of the students had disappeared to who knows where. What if the villains killed them because you got distracted? You might have let over half a class of promising heroes die today because you couldn't pay attention. And now Eraserhead is dying in front of you. And you're just watching. Because you are too much of a coward to help. You really are useless. Rabbit. The pain was excruciating. It felt as if his body was on fire as the arm he had attempted to block Shigaraki's attacks with began to disintegrate before his eyes as the man clutched onto it. But he didn't regret it as he stared into Shigaraki's bloodshot eyes. He had a glint of malice in those ruby-red eyes of his. People always say that the eyes are the window to the soul. That was true for Izuku too. Nomu. Shigaraki smirked. Deal with the hobo. The blackbird monster immediately launched out of sight, but Izuku was too focused on the extreme amount of pain he was experiencing to take his eyes off of Shigaraki. I heard these two are quite close from my... How fun will it be for them to watch each other die? Don't worry, Rabbit. I'll kill you slowly so you can watch Eraserhead suffer. Couldn't he? Shigaraki used his free hand to force Izuku's head to turn. The Nomu was pummeling Eraserhead repeatedly with an extraordinary amount of strength. Izuku wanted to scream. Izuku wanted to cry out, shout for help, anything. But he couldn't. All he could do was be forced to watch as Shigaraki began to disintegrate his left arm next, his right arm not being in irreparable shape, but bad enough that he definitely wouldn't be able to treat it on his own. And from the amount of blood he could feel running down his arm, he would most definitely suffer from severe blood loss. As he watched Eraserhead suffer, not even caring about Shigaraki half disintegrating his limbs, he felt tears welling up in his eyes. The Nomu lifted the bloody and beaten Eraserhead at Shigaraki's command. The man's limbs were awkwardly twisting and his suit was soaked in blood. You see that, Rabbit? That's what's left of your good old Eraserhead. Is it painful, Rabbit? Seeing this person you care about so much in so much pain? You must be feeling a lot less cocky than you were earlier. Shigaraki teased as he went to start disintegrating Izuku's left leg, already having done his right. Oh, Eraserhead. You just don't quit, do you? Shigaraki spat as he pulled his hand away from Izuku's left leg, though it didn't make much difference, given that his quirk wasn't working. The blue-haired man let go of Izuku and the boy just fell forward. Practically all he could hear was white noise as he attempted to get up, but to no avail. He heard a faint crash and a few familiar voices, but he couldn't stay awake for much longer. Even though he attempted to use all of his willpower to stay awake, he didn't have much of that. Izuku Midoriya was sleepy. So he let the black abyss of his nightmares claim him. As Izuku opened his eyes, He realized he was no longer inside the USJ. He tried to get up, but his whole body screamed at him in pain. Probably shouldn't do that. A voice came. Izuku turned his head and saw Recovery Girl next to him. How, wi. Even with the confidence he usually had in his rabbit costume, the boy couldn't help but stutter. Aizawa informed me about you. He told me if I ever see a boy in a green rabbit hoodie with a gray smile mask on, to treat him immediately and not ask any questions. So I'll do just that. You are free to ask me questions though. Recovery Girl answered him. Also, you may still be experiencing a bit of pain. That villain did quite a bit of damage to you, so I couldn't heal all of your injuries at the same time. You didn't have that much energy, either. I'm sorry. It's good.fine. I have a Q question. How is everybody who was involved? You and Aizawa were the only two with major injuries. He's mostly been healed up though. He has a cast for his arm and a few other injuries bandaged. A couple of the students were injured, but it was all minor. All Might and the other heroes arrived before everybody got too hurt. The woman replied. Aizawa and the students got hurt because you were a coward, Deku. They got hurt because I couldn't do anything. I was too weak. You're so useless, Deku. I'll be back in a moment. I have to check on another patient. The woman spoke once again before departing into another section of the office. Izuku didn't waste the opportunity to run. Even if it was painful, he could deal with it if it meant there was less chance of him ending up in jail. Even if Eraserhead trusted her, he still couldn't trust her. He couldn't trust anybody. Hitoshi and Eraserhead were the only two he could trust. He couldn't trouble Kaken with his problems. You shouldn't trouble them with your problems, either. Both Eraserhead and Hitoshi got hurt today because you were too weak. You're not good enough for them, Deku. You never were and you never will be. You're just a sad little quirkless, hoping somebody will accept you. But why should they? Nobody wants a burden. So why should they want you? Recovery Girl must have informed Eraserhead about how he had escaped, because he was cornered by the man in an alleyway, cast and all. Why did you run, Rabbit? Recovery Girl was just trying to help you. She's safe. The man began to speak. No. Nobody's safe, Eraser. Nothing is truly safe. Of course, but there are some things that are safe. The USJ was supposed to be safe. But you almost died today, Eraser. But I didn't. But you could have. But I didn't. You almost did. Do you know how close you were to dying, Eraser? 'Cause I do. I was right there watching. I saw that BS disintegrate your elbow. I watched as you almost bled out. What am I supposed to do when I almost saw the one person who actually gives a shit about me die? My died, Eraserhead. And I don't even know where my dad is. The only other person who ever cared about me almost died too. 'Cause I was too weak. And now I was too weak to save you. The only reason you're alive right now is because All Might came to your rescue. You almost died too. Sure, but I don't give a shit if I die. God, do you ever listen to me? I told you I had a bad feeling about the Uzi trip, but you went anyway. And look at what happened. Villains attacked and you almost died. How many times I have to reiterate that until my point finally penetrates your thick but skull? Heroes are always having to risk their lives to save others. Yeah, and then they hurt the people closest to them. How do you think I felt, Eraser? Having to see you all bloodied up and still trying to save me from Shigaraki? It was horrifying. I saw my mother's cold, dead body, dangling by a rope on her ceiling fan. I thought I'd have to see you like that too, being dangled by that MU as it stared at me with those lifeless eyes, just like you would be doing. Izuku couldn't help but cry, years and years of built-up emotion all flooding out at once. He quickly shut the floodgates again. He couldn't cry right now. He still had to convince Eraserhead. Shoyuta was confused. He was confused at the fact that Rabbit was shouting at him. He was confused at the fact that Rabbit was even mad at him in the first place. He was still confused about the fact that Rabbit had practically predicted the USJ incident occurring in the first place. But past all that confusion, there was one thing he knew. Rabbit had finally shattered. I never knew you had to go through that. Because you barely know me at all. Rabbit kid, I've known you for 5 years dash. No you haven't, Eraser. What? Nobody's known me that long, except maybe him. No, Eraser, you haven't known me for 5 years that you've been trying to kill me, capture me, or a combination of both, for over 4 years. You've only really known me for less than a year. And honestly, you shouldn't really know me. Your job is to catch villains and also catch me. My job is to do the first part of your job, but better. Let's just stick to our jobs, alright Eraser? But Deku dash. No, but Eraser. I don't need anybody pretending to care about me. And even if you do, that's just worse. That just means I'll hurt you when I'm gone, and I don't want that. So it's better if you just don't care. What do you mean when you're gone? See ya never, Eraser. Tell me what you may a dash. But it was too late. Rabbit had already hopped off as he always did. And for all show you to knew, it could be for the last time. This next part was written by Dawn 870. Their links are in both the beginning and end notes. They write way better angst than me and their fics are yes so ye go check them out they are awesome. Author-chan 2 hearts 2 hearts 2 hearts. Izuku crouched in the shadows of an alley, struggling to breathe. The boy could hear his own desperate breathing, but it wasn't enough. Fat tears rolled down his face. He covered his mouth so no sound slipped out. Had he really just said that? Had he really just slipped up that badly? Now Eraserhead was going to find out Midoriya and Rabbit were the same person, and he would hate Izuku for the rest of his life. Worthless, worthless, Deku. Kaken's voice screamed. Inside his head. Nails dug into his skin as he choked back another sob. He couldn't even control his own emotions. How was he ever supposed to amount to anything? Why should he even continue to live? He wondered, idly, if he should break the tradition of trying to kill himself on his birthday and just get it done now. It would save Eraserhead and Hitoshi some trouble. Casting his eyes to the skyline, his hope was dashed. It was so far up, and Izuku was just so tired. How pathetic. You can't even do a single FING selfless thing. You keep wasting space and air, and cling to your pathetic life like you mean something. You're useless. You're quirkless. You're pathetic and selfish and horrid. You'll never be worth the dirt you stand on. And yet, you keep living like the roaches in the trash you scavenge. Stop. Please. Stop. Izuku pleaded to the empty air. There was no answer. Izuku really was selfish, wasn't he? Because despite his absolute worthlessness, he still wanted a hero to save him. Kaken was right. He should save everyone the trouble. But he was just so sleepy. The world faded to black in front of Izuku's tear-soaked eyes. Hitoshi hadn't seen Izuku since the USJ incident, and that caused the hero course student great distress. All he could think about was if the villains had gotten to his friend. Had they been upset about their loss to the heroes and that vigilante, and taken Izuku as compensation? But why would villains only attack one student and not multiple? What if they had and Hitoshi hadn't realized? No. The school would have alerted the other students if that was the case. They wouldn't bat an eye if it was only a quirkless who went missing. That was just how their society worked. But Hitoshi noticed a familiar mop of green hair while he was being dragged through the halls to lunch by Ida and Uraraka. Uraraka decided she was sick of his brooding and attempted to be friends with him. It wasn't going well for either of them so far. It had to have been Izuku. Hitoshi broke out of Uraraka's grasp and grabbed the boy's wrist, even though Ito was quick to reprimand him for his actions. The boy turned around with a look of fear on his face and it was only extenuated when he saw who was clutching his wrist. Aizu, where have you been? I was worried sick dash. Hitokuin.ii. Didi don't know if WATC can be. F our friends, anymore. Izuku cut him off, stuttering more than usual. Hitoshi's eyes widened. What do you mean? Did I do something wrong? Izuku was quick to correct him. Why you're perfect and that's exactly WWI we. C can't be F our friends. Not even G good enough to be B and if the same our dash room does somebody as A amazing as YU. I'm sorry, Hito-kun. Tears welled up in the smaller boy's eyes as he ripped himself from Hitoshi's grasp and sped down the hall. Hitoshi could barely process what had just occurred as Uraraka grabbed his hand and began to lead him to the cafeteria once again. Izuku had moved out of his crevice among the trash of Dagboa and into an old abandoned warehouse a day or so after his fight with Eraserhead. He couldn't have the man finding him, especially due to the fact that Eraserhead might soon find out that Izuku Midoriya and Rabbit were connected, so he had to leave his home of 5 years. It hurt, sure, but it was for both his and Eraserhead's safety. Not that my safety should matter anyway. He already missed Hitoshi and it had barely been 24 hours since he had ended his relationship with the boy. You're so weak, Death. You can't even handle a FING day without those idiots in your life. Izuku bit his lip as he mended his costume. The laundromat manager hadn't even asked him why it was covered in blood and torn. She'd seen it in worse conditions. He couldn't stand to keep looking at it. With each stitch he felt the phantom pain of his skin flaking off as Shigaraki slowly disintegrated each of his limbs. He had completely put off mending it because of that, choosing to train instead, but he knew he had to do it at some point. But even though he had to do it, he couldn't bear to look at his beloved hoodie anymore. He jumped up, grabbed his yellow backpack and ran out of the warehouse. Where he was running, he didn't know, but when he passed a particular graveyard, he knew. He walked over to his own grave. He didn't know who requested for it to be built, but it was nice to know that somebody gave a sheet about him. Every now and then, a red spider lily was placed there. As much as he had despised the flower in his past, he couldn't deny how pretty it was. Izuku picked it up by the severed stem and walked a few graves down, before placing it in front of another grave. The grave of his mother. He shifted uncomfortably as he stared at it. He couldn't believe she'd been dead for almost a decade. He also couldn't believe her death still hurt him after that long. He barely remembered the woman. All he had from her was the yellow backpack he was clutching. The memory of her smile. The memory of her body. The memory of the Nomo dangling. This wasn't about Eraserhead. This was about his mom. He knelt down in front of the stone slab engraved with his mother's name and just continued to stare at it, unsure of what to say. Izuku never really spoke to his mom. He just came to pay his respects every now and then. But he felt like he needed to talk to her this time. Because, other than Kaken, she was now the only person he could talk to. Hey mom. Izuku began to whisper, it's been a w. How are you doing up there? Not doing very well. Ever since I was diagnosed, I haven't been doing very well. Yes, especially after you. I can't blame you for doing why you did. I've been trying to do the same since I was TT10 but... He wiped a tear away with his sleeve. It's been so hard without you no? I can't do anything useful and it's suffocating. It's like I'm drowning in a sea of my own uselessness and all I can do is wait it out until I draw my last breath. I wish you were here. To tell me that it's not bad to be quirkless, because the space is just used for other things that make me useful. That I could use to be a hero, even though I'd know you were lying. Even though I'd know the real truth because I have to face it every day of my life, it would still help me. So much. I know it's selfish but I can't help it. I know I should be able to help it, but I just can't. I've been giving my all for the sake of others my entire life, can't I just be selfish for once? I shouldn't be, I know I shouldn't be. I couldn't protect Eraserhead and Hitoshi. I was too weak. I should be spending all my time training, working to get better, and if I'm still not good enough, I can free the world of this waste of space on my birthday, but it just hurts, so bad. I have nothing to live for, nobody at all. I know I don't deserve anything or anybody, but I want to have something to live for. Aren't I allowed to have wants sometimes? Kaken says I shouldn't have wants, that I'm not allowed to have wants, but I need wants sometimes. If it's a need, then shouldn't I get wants? I know me keeping my life is a want in itself for Kaken, but Izuku put his head in his hands. I need to listen to Kaken, he's so perfect while I'm nothing, he's so superior, I should listen but. I don't want to mom. I can't anymore. I can't do this anymore. I want to die. Please tell me, should I go through with it? Was it a good choice for you? Are you happy now? Please tell me if you're happy. I just wanna be happy. I just wanna be able to be happy. As Izuku paid his respects before shakily standing up and walking back to the warehouse, he had to listen to Kaken berating him. I deserve it. I decided to be selfish and look where it got me. Nowhere. I could have spent that time training or mending my costume so I could finally go out into the world again. Izuku didn't get any sleep that night due to Kaken's voice. But he knew he deserved it. It was his fault for berating Kaken in the first place. Kaken deserved to get his revenge. Shoyuta had two enigmas in his life. One, who he hadn't seen for over a week, was Rabbit, the mysterious vigilante who had Shoyuta running in circles for 5 years. The other, a boy that Shoyuta probably wouldn't see until July 15th, as per usual, was Midoriya, the suicidal teen with lifeless emerald eyes who left Shoyuta hurting at the end of each of their interactions. What were you meant to do when you found out those enigmas were the same person? What Shoyuta did was run straight to Nizu. He had been informing Rat Satan about both boys ever since he'd met them. He wondered how the Chimera had never figured out that the boys were actually the same boy, but Shoyuta had a sneaking suspicion the rat did know. He just wanted to see if Shoyuta could figure it out on his own. He sat in front of UA's principal with his arms crossed, which was practically one of the only things he could do with one of them in a cast. So, Nizu. I've had a breakthrough on both the Midoriya case and the rabbit case. The mammal took a sip of his tea as he grinned widely. Oh? Do tell, Eraser. They're the same person. Rabbit and I had an argument and he spilled a couple of secrets. I finally looked through all of the incidents on Midoriya's file, along with all of his foster homes, and a lot of the things written matched with certain things I've heard from Rabbit over the past year. I've been attempting to find him but he has completely disappeared. The most I can do is wait until July 15th to see him once again. Interesting. Nizu muttered, yet he still wore that sheet-eating grin on his face. I just can't believe I never noticed it over 5 years. Shoyuta sighed, putting his head in his only free hand. I could have saved this kid so much pain if I had just noticed it earlier. He wouldn't have had to shatter if it weren't for me. The USJ fed that kid up, Nizu. He's been through so much shit but I could tell. The USJ was the last straw. If I'd only been strong enough to fight that Nomu, then I'd still be there for him. He wouldn't be in pieces right now. You cannot blame yourself, Aizawa. I'm sure Midoriya-kun doesn't blame you, and would not wish for you to be feeling such anguish right now. How would you know how he's feeling, Nizu? Shoyuta glared at the rat. He knew the man was his boss, but he couldn't help it. I feel a kinship with Midoriya-kun. We both face discrimination due to the absence or presence of a quirk. We've spoken, actually. He is quite the interesting individual. Wait, so do you know where Deku is? Shuta's eyes widened at the prospect of it. Nizu didn't exactly answer that question, rather choosing to say, that is Midoriya-kun's personal business. If he doesn't wish to see you, then you shouldn't push him to, especially if he's shattered, as you call it. Wait for him to come to you. Don't actively seek him out. Sure, if you happen to come across him, attempt to reconcile. He needs some sort of support. But you can't exactly coerce him into accepting it. If he comes to you, then you know that he actually wants the help. The best you can do is wait for that to happen if it does at all. Shoyuta despised Rat Satan's answer, but he didn't deny that the rat was wise. When he didn't know what to do, the best solution was to come to Nizu for an answer. And he had gotten one. He might as well just follow the mammal's directions. After all, anything else would just be selfish. He'd only be doing it to make himself feel better. And Shoyuta didn't want to risk that. Hitoshi wasn't happy. Sure, he had other friends now. Sure, he had only known Izuku for a week. But he couldn't deny that there was just something missing. Obviously, the missing thing was Izuku, since the broccoli lookalike was the only thing that had disappeared from his life recently. But why did he miss him so much? He'd lost a multitude of friends when his quirk came in, but he didn't care about it then. Why did he care about losing one friend now? He realized after a while that it was because he had finally found somebody he could relate to. He never usually had anybody he could talk to with such ease. He was still having trouble talking to Uraraka and Ida. But Izuku was easy to talk to, especially when the boy did the most of the talking. Hitoshi could just spend his lunches listening to Izuku's rambling about what he'd learned that day, both in his lesson and about the hero who was teaching him. He would even contribute every now and then, though he mostly just stuck to active listening. With Uraraka and Ida, he mostly just drowned out their conversations. It was nice that they had attempted to include him in their friendship, but Hitoshi just couldn't find a way to talk to them. These two people that had almost everything going for them, and him, a husk of the boy he once was with a villainous quirk to boot. He was sure they only included them because of their heroic personalities. They were Hero Corps students after all, not because they particularly gave a shit about him as a person. They had tried to do the same with Todoroki, but the bicolored boy had just walked away. Hitoshi wished he could just do that too. He probably would have. But he needed some sort of semblance of a relationship in his life. What was the point though? He couldn't even hold a conversation with the two of them. He should just tell them the truth. Lying to them was just selfish. But Hitoshi couldn't help being selfish, just this once. He couldn't be friends with Izuku again. He respected the boy and his decision, as much as it hurt. But his classmates wanted to include him, right? So he'd indulge. Just this once. He'd be selfish. Because he needed to be selfish right now. Izuku had been training non-stop for the past 2 weeks. The UA Sports Festival was only in a couple of days' time. He'd gone on less patrols recently, to both avoid Eraserhead and so he would have more time to train. He preferred to not have to look for criminals all night and waste time he could have spent training. Sure, the experience was good, but it wasn't worth it in the end. Izuku decided that he'd practically already failed at being useful as a vigilante, so winning the UA Sports Festival was his last chance. If he failed, then he would finally be able to die on July 15th. Eraserhead wouldn't try to help him now. He obviously knew Izuku was quirkless now. Why would he care about him anymore? He already assumed that Eraserhead wasn't interested in him anymore. He guessed the man was angry with him for his outburst, which Izuku understood. It wasn't good to let your emotions out. They would only upset other people. You just had to box them up and store them away, leave them unknown to the rest of the world. That was all he could really do. Kaken didn't really like it when Izuku. He didn't like it when Izuku was angry, or happy, or fearful, or whenever he felt anything. Useful people don't let their FING emotions hold them back. You can't afford to feel shit, Deku. Your quirklessness already puts you at a massive but disadvantage. If you're gonna attempt to be useful for once in your DMN life, you might as well shut out all your FING emotions. This is why he had to listen to Kaken. Kaken was always right. If he had just obeyed, he wouldn't have yelled at Eraserhead. How could he do that to the poor man? Izuku had seen what he had just been through, and then he decided to pull a stunt like that. I'm such a dumbass. Razor didn't deserve that. He was just trying to protect his students. My feelings don't matter. He told me himself that heroes are always risking their lives. I had no right to judge him for just doing his job. Izuku slid down the warehouse walls as he slapped himself across the face. He couldn't let this distract him right now. He began whispering encouragement to himself. Stay calm, why can D do this right now? Why you on only have a few days on until T the last sage chance at redemption you'll ever get at J just keep TR training, is Izuku. It's not as I if you haven't any worth other than that. Whether it was the lack of decent food lately, the overwork, or just the fact that he couldn't breathe right, he couldn't get to his feet. His whole body trembled with exhaustion. Useless, you can't even do the one thing you need to do. This will make you almost worth something, and you can't even do that. I'm trying. I can't Kaken, I just can't. Izuku cried out, struggling to breathe as each breath hitched in his throat and tears clung to the corners of his eyes. You have to. You may as well just lay down and die now if you refuse to be worth anything. Did you just realize that you're dumb but should have listened to me this whole time? You can't give up on that already, Deku. I know and I'm sorry, but... Don't apologize, just keep training, idiot. You've already got your life, what else do you need? One want is enough. You want more sleep? I bet you can get a ton of sleep if you finally manage to jump off that apartment building without the hobos saving your worthless but... As the tears began to drip down his cheeks, Kaken's voice only got louder in his head. Dumbass. You gotta learn to stop crying so effing much. God, are you so used to crying that sadness is your neutral emotion now? Keep that poker face you give to the hobo each year. Tears aren't gonna help you gain even the tiniest bit of worth. How the F would you even get past one round in the sports festival when you can't even control your own emotions? Izuku wanted to respond, but his words decided to get hitched along with his breath. All he could do was sob as Kaken only got angrier with him. He knew he deserved it, so why did it hurt so much? Why couldn't he stop crying? What was wrong with him? Izuku couldn't believe himself right now. Kaken was right, he might as well just get it all over with already. So why couldn't he just stand? He was wasting precious time. He could be training, studying, building support items. He didn't have the time to rest. If he got his 3 hours now, his schedule would become a complete mess. And then he'd have to waste even more precious time fixing it again. What if he slept for too long? He had school, he'd end up being late, and then the teachers would realize how useless he is. He couldn't be expelled right before the sports festival. Legs trembling, he forced himself up. Every step caused him a spike of pain. Izuku couldn't afford to care right now though. He had training to do. Shoyuta knew that he shouldn't be selfish, but he was finding it really hard not to be. The sports festival was tomorrow and he still hadn't seen his problem child once. He knew Rat Satan told him to not get involved, but he was finding it really hard not to. He went on as many patrols as he possibly could to try and catch a glimpse of the boy. Nizu had said if he saw Deku he could try and talk to him after all, but his attempts were in vain. He couldn't help but worry about the kid, seeing as it had been over 2 weeks and there was still no sign of him. What if he was dead in a ditch somewhere and Shoyuta would never even know? He hated the thought of it, but he couldn't get it out of his head, along with a myriad of other scenarios. He didn't want to assure the worst for the small boy, but given how little self-preservation and worth the boy had, he couldn't doubt that those possibilities were very likely. He knew he should trust the kid, but it just wasn't that easy to do. He'd seen that child shatter, right in front of his eyes, and without a pillar of support he would never have the stability to put himself back together. He needed somebody to be that pillar. And Shoyuta wanted to be exactly that. But how was he meant to when he couldn't even find the boy in the first place? Shoyuta sighed. He'd look for Deku tomorrow. But for now, he just had to focus on making sure the sports festival went well. Izuku was the epitome of nervousness. Being a part of a cluster of 220 students wasn't fun, especially as all he could hear were the screams of the crowd and the bitter jabs the other students were taking at the hero course students. He got excited when Midnight walked on stage, but a quick reminder from Kaken made him revert back to the poker face he had been holding before. Speaking of Kaken, that he was the student representative for that year. Because of course he was. The athlete's oath. Kaken began to speak. Make no mistake about it. I'm gonna take first place. Roars of protest emerged from the sea of students, from both the other classes and Class A itself. Don't get cocky, Class A. Why must you show contempt for the dignity of this event? You dirty bisudi. You'll all make great stepping stones, I'd say. Kaken retorted, which only angered the crowd further. As he stepped down from the stage, Izuku could hear how people shot insults at him. Izuku wanted to comfort him, but Kaken was strong. And Izuku couldn't afford to distract him. Izuku could tell the boy pushing himself. Now, without any delay, let's get the first event started. Midnight looked to the board behind her. These are the qualifiers. It's in this stage that so many are sent home crying every year. And the fateful first event this year as she raised her hand to gesture to the board as something appeared on it. An obstacle course. It's a race between every member of all 11 classes. The course is a 4-kilometer lap around the stadium itself. Our schools preaches freedom, Indiana, all things, so as long as you don't go off course, anything is fair game. Racers, to your positions. Midnight directed as the cluster of students all gathered behind the starting gate. I'll prove that I can be useful for once in my life. I'll win this, and then maybe I'll be good enough to be acquaintances with Hitoshi. And, start. Midnight yelled. Izuku didn't even have the time to pick his feet up off the ground as he was jostled forward by the rest of the students trying to rush ahead. He noticed immediately that with how narrow the corridor into the course was, that it was the first obstacle. A bicolored boy seemed to notice this too. As soon as he exited the corridor, he froze the floor and most of the other students with it, only a few ones being able to escape his wrath. Izuku remembered Hitoshi mentioning this boy. Todoroki. He had a quirk that allowed him to use ice with his right side and fire with his left, but so far the class has apparently not seen a single demonstration of his left side. Izuku hoped that it was just because it wouldn't be useful in classes, but given the other person he knew called Todoroki, it could always be more than that. But Izuku couldn't focus on that right now. He had to break through the ice and through this obstacle course. Yo, Eraser! Are you ready for our live coverage and commentary? Not voluntarily. And also figure out how to not let Eraserhead spot him. Sure, he didn't think the man was interested in him as a friend anymore, but he was still a criminal. Eraserhead would take him in the second he appeared on screen. As each person used their quirk in a unique way to get ahead, Izuku was sure he was going to lose. But then he saw the giant robots. Now Izuku was sure he was going to die. Every obstacle course needs obstacles. Present Mike yelled into his mic, starting with the first barrier, Robo Inferno. Todoroki didn't seem bothered by the massive hunks of metal, however. He simply froze them and rushed on ahead. He stopped them. One student yelled out, "We can get through that gap." Bad idea. I froze them in pretty unstable positions, Todoroki replied, before continuing to run ahead, so they'd fall. Class 1, this Todoroki. Busting through and sabotaging the others in one move. This guy's cold. Amazing. He's way ahead of the pack. Almost feels unfair. Present Mike continues to commentate. No sign of Eraserhead making an announcement to notify everybody that a wanted vigilante was running through the course. You really don't need me here, do you? There was Eraserhead. Luck still seemed to be on Izuku's side, though, as the man didn't seem to have noticed him yet. Two boys had gotten stuck under the robots as they crashed to the ground. They both survived, luckily, but complained due to the similarity of their quirks. Izuku didn't really get what they meant. Just having a quirk at all was amazing, and there were quite a few differences that made them just as unique as anybody else. Though of course a quirkless BSRD like you would think that, Deku? Down low didn't work for Class 1, a.s. Bakugo, so he took the high road. Clever. Wait. Izuku looked up to see a familiar figure with spiky blonde hair, propelling himself upwards using his explosions. Kaken. Izuku whispered before shaking his head. No, he could worry about Kaken noticing him later. Right now he was more interested in how he would beat these robots. Though the other students seemed to have been doing that for him. The current leaders of the pack are overwhelmingly from Class A. Present Mike yelled into his mic once again, but Izuku wasn't focused on him. Rather, he was focused on the armor plate that one of the robots had dropped. He hauled it up and began to smash through the robots along with those from the hero course, also using he plate as a shield from any stray pieces of metal that came his way. Though it seems as if the other courses are making a comeback. Well done to both the support course and general studies. Izuku looked ahead of him to see a girl completely decked out in support items, swinging across a massive pit that only had tightropes to assist you. So the first barrier was a piece of cake. How about the second? Fall and you're out. Izuku didn't want to think about if Present Mike was only mentioning out, as in out of the competition. You gotta crawl across if you want to make it. This isist at the fall. Izuku shimmied his way across the tightrope, still clutching onto the armor plate. He had no clues concerning the next barrier, so as far as Izuku knew, he'd probably need it. Even if it slowed him down right now, he was willing to take the chance of it having all sorts of uses. The truth is, we've got all types trying to make it big here today, Eraserhead. Please stop trying to involve me. Meanwhile, the leaders of the pack move on undaunted. They keep breaking ahead while the rest of the pack is all bunched up. Our racers don't know how many will get to move on, so all they can do is aim for first place. Speaking of first place, seems like our leader has reached the final barrier. That is to say. Izuku stared at the obstacle a few yards ahead of him in shock. This minefield. It's a deadly Afghan carpet. A quick glance is enough to reveal the mine's locations. So keep both eyes open and watch your step. Oh, I should also mention. Our mines don't pack a deadly punch, but they're loud and flashy enough that you might need a change of underwear when it's all over. So the next obstacle was meant to put the lead at a disadvantage. It was a good thing that Izuku was last, for once in his life. He looked ahead to see Kaken's explosions blocking his vision of who was ahead, but present Mike quickly cleared up what was going on for Izuku. We have a new leader. Get excited, mass media. You guys love this sorta turnaround. But the rest are catching up. With Bakugo and Todoroki battling each other for first, can they hold on to their lead? He decided to analyze the obstacle so he could see what the best course of action would be. So, the me mines are the TT type that blow up WH when stepped on. Teach they're only strong enough to T-toss us AR around a bit. B but if you're thrown off C course, you C could cause a chain reaction and low lose a lot of time. Be better to slow down and AV avoid them if it means not taking D damage. Though it's not like the leaders can afford to get C careless either. There are more mines at front, and trying to slow down others is a guaranteed loss. Just focus. Which spots are the people back here avoiding? It's the entrance where people are most on guard. So that means, he stuck the armor plate into the ground, anti-personnel mines should only be 14 to 5 centimeters down. I can dig em up with this. Bakugo and Todoroki are in the lead. They're about to cross the finish line. What's this? A new contender for first place is in hot pursuit. And he's passed them. Izuku Midoriya from General Studies. As Izuku freaked out about how the hell he was meant to land now and how both Eraserhead and Kaken knew he was here, he heard two voices that gave him reason for his latter worries. Holy shit, that my problem child dash. DKU. Get your butt back here. Thank you for that interesting addition, Eraserhead. Or should I call you Eraserdad? Don't call me that. Anyway, our former leaders have called ceasefire to chase down Midoriya. When a common enemy appears, people stop fighting. Actually, they're still fighting, just not each other. What are you even trying to say? Dang it, I need to do something. If I lose T time on this landing, P passing them A again W will be I'm impossible. I need to W in. Teach this is my 01ch chance to prove I C can be us useful. While I'm still ahead, if P passing them AG again is possible. I'll take any risk. Izuku tightened his grip on a rope he had unhooked from the fall and placed onto the armor plate so he could shimmy across one of the other tightropes, or to just drag it along if he needed to. It was becoming far more useful now. He used all the strength he had to smash the scrap metal against the ground. And Midoriya blows off the competition with no time to lose. Who could have predicted such an incredible turn of events so early on? The one who made it back to the stadium first Isis. Izuku was greeted by a cheering crowd, none other than Izuku Midoriya from General Studies. Shoyuta wanted to just believe it was a coincidence when he heard Deku's name for the first time. But a fourth mention of the boy and the close-up of his face on the stadium screen just confirmed it. His problem child went to UA and had just won the first round of the UA Sports Festival. He wasn't dead. Shoyuta was relieved, but that didn't mean he didn't want to down a whole pot of coffee right now due to his stress being a whole lot stronger than his relief. Dang it, what the hell am I gonna do with you? He muttered under his breath with a chuckle. Hisashi had heard him though. Susu, what's this about Midoriya being your problem child, Sho? His husband was lucky their mics were muted right now. You know that thing I've been working on for the past 5 years and didn't tell you anything about? And then that other thing I've been working on for just one. Yeah. I just thought you were blowing your own husband off and kept using the same excuse every time. Then, when you thought it wasn't believable anymore, you just added a second thing on top. Of course not, idiot. There were two cases that I took on for personal reasons, and given the circumstances of them both, I didn't want to bother telling you about them. It wouldn't be fair to the people involved and you had your own stuff, but you probably have already gathered this, but Rabbit and I weren't always friends. He was a wanted vigilante, so I had to capture him. At first, figuring out his identity was just so I could arrest him, but this year he began confiding in me about certain things and it became more trying to find out this vigilante's identity so I can get him some therapy. I had already been doing the same for another child, Midoriya, who I saw every year due to a certain event, so I figured I might as well try to help Rabbit too. Found out a few weeks ago that they're the same person. Knowing a certain detail about Deku, that he isn't afraid of death, I was worried for him. He got hurt bad at the, Even though Recovery Girl healed him, he had no energy at all. He could have just died in an alleyway or a ditch or something and I never would have known. I can't believe Rat Satan never told me that Deku goes to you. Though he did tell me not to seek him out. He probably knew I'd do exactly that if I knew Deku was a student here. At least you know he's fine now, right? Hisashi offered him a warm smile. Yeah. Shoyuta turned his head to look back down at the stadium, but he won't be for long if Bakugo manages to get near him. The top 42 from this qualifying round will move on. Kiyama announced after the rankings had appeared on screen, but for those of you who placed lower, don't worry. We've still got another way for you to show your stuff. For now though, this is where the main section of the sports festival really begins. The press corp's gonna be jumping out of their seats, so give it all you've got. Now on to the second event. I already know what it is, of course. Dying in suspense. Next is this. A cavalry battle. Participants will, on their own, form teams of 2 to 4 members each and get into a horse and rider formation. The rules are fundamentally the same as those of a normal cavalry battle. Snag your opponents while guarding your own, but with one exception. Each of you have been assigned a point value based on your ranking in the last event. Shoyuta guessed some of the students began to practically explain the event for her, because she snapped, "I'm just about to explain it, so just shut up already." Ahem, anyway, your points shall all be combined with the rest of your team, so your total value will depend on the team's members. Your individual values start at 5, and rise up by another 5 as you go up the ranks. So the student who took 42nd place is worth 5 points, 41 is worth 10, etc. But our first place participant is worth 10 million points. As all 41 students turned to look at Deku, Shoyuta knew that it was pretty much official at this point. His kid was completely and utterly screwed. 10 million points? Izuku whispered as everybody's gaze shifted onto him. Their gazes pierced through his poker face as it slowly began to slip. He quickly put it back in place as Midnight continued to explain the cavalry battle, but even if the students' attention was now on her, he still felt as if they were all looking at him. The match will last 15 minutes. Each team's points are determined by its members. The rider will wear a headband displaying the total number of points. Until the match ends, you'll all compete to grab each other's points and maintain the ones you have. Any headbands you grab must be worn around the neck or higher. But the more headbands you've got, the harder they'll be to manage. Most importantly, even if your headband is taken, and even if your horse formation is broken, it's not over till it's over. The other students began to talk as Midnight kept explaining the rules. Quirks are allowed, so it'll be a brutal battle. However, it's still a cavalry battle. Maliciously attacking another team with the intent of making them fall will get you a red card. And that means you're out of the game. You've got 15 minutes. Time to form your teams. Only 15 minutes. 15 minutes wasn't even enough time for Izuku to work up the courage to talk to somebody, let alone talk to 3 people and convince them all to be on a team with him. Some people obviously found it much easier than Izuku did, however, as the support item-covered girl bounded up to him. "Hey, Mr. First Place." She grinned. "You sure do stand out. I can't believe a shorty like you won the first round without using your quirk. Maybe I could make you a support item so you're a bit taller. But first, you gotta team up with me, Mr. First Place." "Why you wanna team you up with me?" Izuku asked. He had to make sure he had heard the girl right. She reminded him of somebody he used to talk to. Of course I do. I'm Mei Hatsum from the support course, and you're gonna be my ticket to the industry big shots recognizing my genius. She wanted to use him for his first place title. He didn't mind. It wasn't like he hadn't been used before. Joining with you inevitably means I'll be right in the spotlight, which will give my babies the perfect chance to shine. He didn't question her choice of words, he also treated his own support items in that manner, though he would never admit it. But don't worry, this isn't only advantageous to me. In the support course, we develop equipment to make heroes' quirks easier to use. Izuku bit his lip. I don't really need anything to enhance my Q quirk. It's key kinda useless on me. Oh, you're quirkless? How did you dash? That's even better. If there's no flashy quirk in the way, they have no choice but to look at my babies. I've got plenty of my babies here, and I'm 100% sure you'll find one or two that'll suit you and your fighting style. Hatsum suddenly pulled a myriad of support items out of nowhere. Yo, you have so many cool support items. And none of mine could ever be that complex. Izuku gasped as he looked through them. Wait, you build support items too? Are you in the support course like me? I thought you were some hero course student. She raised an eyebrow at him. Oh, I'm not in either AC actually. I'm a General ST Studies student. Aw, dang it. I wish you were in support. I like ya, Mr. First Place. I am actually trying for the Hero course, but W8 is that Buster Hero Air Jets Popak. Whoa, it looks exactly like H's. I'm surprised you noticed. Yeah, it was modeled after his. You have a good eye. But not as good as mine. She gave him another grin. My quirk allows me to zoom in up to 5 kilometers. It's really useful when working on my babies. That's so C-. Excuse me, Midoriya, was it? A voice came from behind him. Izuku turned around to see a girl with shoulder-length brown hair and pink cheeks. I don't really have anybody to team up with, so is it alright if I join yours? Yeah. Izuku gave her a far too enthusiastic nod. Will be glad to have you on our team. Oh, I'm Achiko Uraraka, from the hero course. My quirk is zero gravity. I can make anything weightless if I touch it, but if I overuse it I get sick, the girl explained with a smile. That's a really cool chew quirk. He gave her a false smile in return. Hey, you're Uraraka-san. Did you know anybody else who doesn't have anybody to team up with I in your CL class? I saw how a lot of ST students' chew quirks worked during the OB obstacle course, AN. He explained one of the students he had seen with a quirk he thought would be quite beneficial to their team. Oh yeah, I think he's still free. He's over there. Go ask him if he wants to join our team. She pointed over to the boy in question. Alright. Izuku mumbled, before working up the courage to go and speak to him, or at least attempting to. Your 15 minutes are up. Time to get started. Midnight announced. Formed your teams? Made your plans? Too bad if you haven't. Here we go, the countdown to this brutal battle royale. 3, 2, 1. Start. As soon as the battle started, people immediately came running at Midoriya and his team. Oh shit. Incoming attacks right off the bat. There are 2 teams. The fate of those who are pursuing us. Make your choice, Midoriya. Tokoyami demanded. Run. Izuku replied. His teammates attempted to do just that, but the ground suddenly lost its density and their feet sunk into it. The others looked to him for guidance on what to do next. Though the pressure was unbearable, he pushed through it, turn away for a moment, and make sure to hang on. He pressed a button and the replica of Air Jet's pack propelled Izuku and his team upwards. A girl with earphone jacks for earlobes attempted to attack them, but Tokoyami stopped her with Dark Shadow, congratulating the quirk after it succeeded at defending them. Well done, Dark Shadow. Be sure to cover our blind spots. Thank you as well, Tokoyami-kun. We were lacking a little defensive power, but now that we have you, we're covered at mid-range from every direction. I saw you in action a little in the obstacle C course, but I didn't know why you were this good. You're the one who chose me, was the simple reply the bird-headed boy gave him. Izuku released the button, and they began to fall. We're landing. Uraraka informed the others as a pair of boots Hatsum had given the other girl activated, stopping them with a burst of air just before they hit the ground. How do you like my babies? Cute, aren't they? Why yeah, and really useful too. They're making us completely mobile. Thank you, Hatsum-san. Only 'cause I floated all of you. Uraraka murmured. Why yup, your quirk is amazing, you are Uraraka-san. Thank you for floating us. Izuku comforted the girl as they began running again. Well, barely 2 minutes have passed, but the battlefield's already chaotic. With everyone scrambling for headbands, it's not just the 10 million out there. Those other high rankers are worth a shot as well. Scramble, he says? No, this is a one-sided massacre. Izuku spun his head to see a boy running at them, his 6 conjoined arms creating a tent-like shape on his back. Izuku attempted to see if there was anything he was hiding in there, but it was too dark. Shoji is all alone? But this is a cavalry battle. Uraraka exclaimed as Tokoyami grumbled, we must keep our distance. Fighting multiple foes is a bad idea. However, when they attempted to take off once again, Uraraka informed them of something. Guys, I'm stuck. Izuku looked down at her boot to see a barely visible purple ball stuck to the bottom of it. Some key kind of sticky bee-balled eye. Is that somebody's quirk? But the only person with that kind of quirk is Mineta, and he's not Dash. In here, Tokoyami. A voice called from inside of the tent on the 6-armed boy's back. A head emerged, a short boy with more of those sticky purple ball for hair. As Izuku contemplated if they were even allowed to do that, a tongue shot out of the tent. Izuku barely dodged it before making the ultimate decision of activating the air jetpack, though he knew that there could be consequences. Knew it. My baby got ripped apart. Hatsum cried. I'm sorry, Hatsum-san. But we managed to get away. Izuku attempted to reassure her, turning his head to give her a smile, however false it may have been. However, something caught his eye. Kaken. Izuku's eyes widened, paling as the boy glared back at him. Getting pretty full of yourself, huh, you be Tokoyami. Izuku managed to stutter out, and the bird-headed boy directed Dark Shadow to defend against one of Kaken's explosions before it hit their team. What the hell Dash, Kaken started, but a piece of tape came out of nowhere and dragged him back down to the field. Both the doggedly pursued first-place team and its determined pursuers from Class A are nothing to sneeze at. As they landed, Izuku noticed that Kaken seemed to be preoccupied with another team. It gave Izuku a bit of hope that they could still win this. Hey, guys. I don't think it'll be BT to evade Dash. Yet, while he was speaking words of encouragement, Izuku noticed a team other than Mineta's in front of them, consisting of a smirking blonde, a blue-haired boy wearing glasses, a girl with her midnight black hair pulled into a ponytail, and Todoroki. Looks like this match is half over already. The bicolored boys stared daggers at Izuku. We're coming for you, Team Midoriya. Looks like this won't end without a fight. Everyone is really gunning for you, Midoriya. We're halfway through, so we've gotta keep 'em moving. But there are multiple teams incoming. Izuku was freaking out a little as Todoroki gave orders to his teammates, and the 6-armed boy folded out his arms, preparing to attack while revealing the 2 people on his back. Suddenly, a wave of electricity covered the playing field. Todoroki's team had some sort of sheet, he guessed it was insulated, and Dark Shadow took the damage for his team, but almost all of the other teams were electrocuted, getting frozen by Todoroki immediately after. Izuku's team was just barely able to avoid being hit by the ice due to Hatsum's hover boots. What's this now? Todoroki's taken out a herd of cavalry teams with one fierce attack. He must have recalled how many competitors managed to dodge. his ice during the obstacle course, so he had Kaminari shock them beforehand to ensure they would not be able to avoid his attack this time. Eraserhead murmured into his mic. Nice play-by-play. Izuku attempted to take off again after dodging the ice, hoping to avoid it a little longer, but he noticed something. Hatsum. Shtapax onto the Fritz. My baby. I guess there's room for improvement. They're too strong. We'll never get away. Uraraka cried, but Tokoyami shook his head. I'll create a diversion. The boy sent out Dark Shadow to attack, but a piece of metal appeared out of nowhere and blocked it. Izuku suddenly realized what the ponytail girl's quirk was. Oh, she must have some kind of creation chu quirk, alright? That'll be annoying to deal with. No. Kaminari, the boy who electrocuted everyone, is the real problem here. If he'd used even a slightly stronger attack, he would have wrecked my armor. Tokoyami reminded Izuku. Alright. Yo-Yu informed us about your weakness to Lilite. Do they know about it? Most likely not. The only one I ever told about my weakness was a boy in my class called Koda, but he doesn't talk much. Izuku gave him a fairly confident nod. Okay, as long as they don't know, we see and faked them out. Only about a minute left. Todoroki made his own little arena and was primed to snatch the 10 million in an instant. Or so we thought. But Midoriya's managed to evade Todoroki inside this small space for 5 whole minutes now. Present Mike yelled as Izuku was barely able to dodge another attempt to grab his headband. They had practically just been going in circles at this point, but as long as they kept the 10 million, Izuku was fine with that. They just had to survive 1 more minute before they won. Izuku prepared himself to dodge Todoroki yet again, but he realized their team had stopped and were talking. They were making a strategy. Okay. Gee guys, they're PL planning a something? Hatsum-san, can you zoom in ANCWH who's talking ditch the most? It's probably ditch their plan. Roger that, Mr. First Place. She nodded. While she did that, he turned to face Uraraka. Uraraka-san, do why you know the quirk of the blue H-haired G-guy? That's Ida, his quirk is engine. It's a speed-based quirk that makes him have engines in his calves, if you couldn't guess that from the name. Well, it's Speedy himself who's talking the most. Can you infer anything from that, Mr. First Place? He's mostly likely planning to do some big ultimate move that will enhance their mobility a ton. I'll be hard to dodge if that is their PL plan, but then again, if I am correct, if that means we can know their strategy. We should keep running F for now while using D Dark Acid Shadow to keep an EI on them, just L like before. It can alert us if Ida-kun is doing anything out of the ordinary with H's quirk. His team agreed and they set off once again. A few seconds later, Izuku was beginning to doubt that the other team was even coming for them anymore, but he heard a help from Dark Shadow behind him. They're approaching. Izuku didn't even take the time to reply, instead just swerving out of the way. The other team almost passed them completely without being able to grasp the headband, but Izuku froze when he noticed something on Todoroki's arm. Fire. The boy was using his fire. Izuku's head flooded with memories of Hitoshi. He felt the phantom pain of molten skin sliding down his back like wax. Memories of Hideo pinning him to the wall as Teo burned closed any wounds the former had given Izuku, not hesitating to burn him if he squirmed even a little. It hurts, 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 it hurts it. Midoriya. The headband. It's gone. Izuku snapped out of his haze due to Uraraka's voice. He reached a hand up to his curls and sure enough, the headband was gone. He looked over to see the other team had slowed. What a reversal. Todoroki's got the 10 million and Midoriya's plummeted down to 0. After them. Izuku yelled, but Tokoyami shook his head. No, I can't attack as long as Kaminari's there. Going after someone else's points is our best B-dash. W can't. The point D difference is T2 wide O of a G gap, we won't have enough time. W have to G go after them. Tokoyami seemed hesitant, but due to the fact that they had no time to argue right now, he nodded in agreement. They all began running after Todoroki and his team, as Present Mike announced there were only 20 seconds left of the match. As they got nearer, Izuku noticed Todoroki had turned the headbands inside out to hide their point values, but he was sure the 10 million would be at top. Todoroki attempted to defend against Izuku, managing to freeze his arm, but Izuku didn't care as he ripped the top headband from around Todoroki's neck. 10. 8. Izuku unclenched his fist to look at the headband he'd grabbed. 7. 6. 5. His relatively celebratory expression turned into one of horror as he read the point value. 4. 70. 3. Izuku had grabbed the wrong headband. 2. And now his team would despise him. 1. He'd failed them. Time's up. Because you're just a worthless Deku. Let's see who the top 4 teams were. You knew you'd never be able to win, yet you so much effing time trying anyway. In first place, Team Todoroki. And look where it got you. In second place, Team Bakugo. You're just a FING waste of space. In third place, Team No. It's Team Shinso. You might as well leave and go jump off that building right in. Midoriya. Uraraka approached him as he picked off the ice on his arm. I'm sorry. I understand if you hate me and now. They have every right to. Uraraka shook her head and simply pointed towards Tokoyami, who began to speak. While Todoroki attempted to defend against you, I tried to grab the 10 million, but I came up short. However, I managed to grab the one on his head while you were distracting him. Wait, so that meant? In fourth place, Team Midoriya. After the recreational activities, it's time for the final event. Midnight yelled to the crowd. She had just explained some sort of games that the students could participate in before the final event of the sports festival, but Izuku had tuned her out, knowing he wouldn't have the energy for them, so there was no point in listening. Between the 16 members of the 4 winning cavalry battle teams, we will have a formal tournament. A series of one-on-one battles. The matchups will be decided by lots. Once that's settled, we'll move on to the festivities and then the tournament itself. Now, let's start with the first place dash. Excuse me, a boy with a tail mutation had risen his hand. I'd like to drop out. Ojiro, why? This is your chance to get noticed by the pros. An invisible girl in a cheerleader uniform spoke with desperation. The cavalry battle? I have no memories of what happened during it until the end. Shinso must have used his quirk on me. I know this is a great opportunity, and I know how stupid it must seem to throw it away, but I don't feel comfortable participating in the tournament when I didn't earn it. Ojiro continued. The invisible girl continued to berate him, telling him that he shouldn't just throw this chance away and that he was thinking about it too hard, but Ojiro but his head in his hands. No. I'm talking about my pride here. I don't think it's right. Another boy began to speak up. I can't remember anything about the cavalry battle either. I want to withdraw too. This is a contest of skill. Letting someone who didn't do anything advance. Doesn't it defeat the whole point of the sports festival? Isn't it even against the rules? We have a strange turn of events. Though this all depends on what the coordinator, Midnight, decides. What's your decision, Midnight? Present Mike asked her. Izuku didn't know why the man thought this was a good time for commentary, but he didn't question it. How naive and green, she murmured, before cracking her W. I like it. Shoda and Ojiro have officially withdrawn. Replacing those two will be members of Team Kendo, who dash. A girl with her orange hair in a side pony shook her head. If it's gonna be like that, shouldn't it be the members of Team Tetsu who move on? I mean, we were immobilized practically the entire time, but they were giving it their all until the very end. So be it. Tetsu and Shiozaki bring us back up to 16 competitors. Here are the matchups. Izuku scanned the board, finding his name on the very first bracket. But his heart dropped when he read the name of his opponent. Hitoshi Shinso. Izuku stepped onto the stage to the cheers of the surrounding crowd. He wanted to cover his ears and just run, but that wasn't an option right now. He had to get through this no matter what. He couldn't read Hitoshi's expression, but the whirlpool of emotions showing in the other boy's narrowed eyes spoke volumes. At the very least, Hitoshi wasn't ready for this reunion, especially as it was in front of not just the people in the stadium, but practically all of Japan. And neither was Izuku. With the games out of the way, it's time for the third and final round of the UA Sports Festival. Midnight announced to the stadium to receive another round of cheers from the audience. Present mic continued for her, "You've all been through hell to get here. But it's finally here, the one-on-one tournament. For our first match, the winner of the obstacle course. Even though his performance in the second round wasn't quite as good, I'll show. Anyway, I'm sure he'll do great. It's Izuku Midoriya, from General Studies. Verse. Sorry, this guy hasn't really done anything to stand out yet. Why do you keep hitting me? It's Hitoshi Shinsu, from the hero course. It pained Izuku that Hitoshi's introduction was simple compared to his. The other boy was so much more incredible than Izuku, who hadn't even deserved to take first place in the obstacle course. He just abused the rules of it and used the mines to his advantage. He didn't do it right. He was meant to use his own strength. Not that you have any. Not that Izuku had any strength to use, but still. The rules are simple. Win by knocking your opponent out of the ring, immobilizing them, or getting them to say, "I give up." Bring the pain, as we've got our good old recovery girl on standby. And fight dirty if you must. Ethics have no meaning here. Well, of course, going for the kill is a... You'll be disqualified. Because a true hero's fists fly only when in pursuit of villains. Now, let's get this thing started. Are you ready, Izuku? He kept his lips pressed together as Hitoshi talked. Ready, ai. The purple-haired boy just glared at him. I hope you are. Just because we were friends, doesn't mean I'll go easy on you. Start. Neither of them moved an inch. You know, Izuku, ever since we stopped being friends, I haven't been sitting behind the school. Rather, I've been in the cafeteria with some kids from my class, so I've been around school more in these past weeks. Izuku still didn't say a word as Hitoshi continued to speak. Each time I walk through the halls, with or without my friends, it felt as if Hitoshi was taunting him with that word. Friends. A silent "I'm better off without you" echoed through that simple word, intentional or not, but Izuku already knew that Hitoshi was better off without him. That was one of the reasons why he stopped being friends with him in the first place. I hear the whispers of the other students. Do you want to hear what they say about me? Izuku once again didn't respond, and Hitoshi began taking a few steps forward. A guy like him doesn't deserve to be in the hero course. Not with a villainous quirk like that. I bet he cheated to get in. There are so many other people who should have been in the hero course in place of him. I hear stuff like that every day. I'm envious of you sometimes, you know. Nobody is scared of you. He wanted to tell Hitoshi that he shouldn't envy him one bit, but Izuku couldn't say a word to the other boy, or he'd lose. So he just began walking forward as well, clenching his hands into fists and digging his nails into his palms as a method to stop himself from responding. Ignoring me now? What, do you think that just because you won the first round that you're better than me, Izuku? Hitoshi furrowed his brow as his pace quickened. Just respond. Izuku shook his head as he ran at the purple-haired boy and began to push him. You think that'll be enough to win against me? Hitoshi scoffed as he reached for Izuku's wrist. He noticed and kneed the taller boy in the stomach. Hitoshi fell backwards and onto the ground, but he quickly recovered, jumping back up. He smirked, capture scarf now in hand. Izuku was undaunted by the fact that Hitoshi had pulled out his weapon, however, only wishing that he had decided to bring his baton, even though hitting 15-year-olds over the head with a metal stick may be frowned upon. He ran at the boy once again, grasping his wrist like Hitoshi had attempted to do to him before. He realized too late, however, that the other boy had wrapped his capture weapon around Izuku's ankle, Hitoshi tugging on it and causing Izuku to hit the ground. He swept Hitoshi off his feet with a kick, however, jumping up and finally managing to do what both boys had been attempting the entire round. He grasped Hitoshi's wrist and threw him to the ground, just barely out of bounds. Midnight put a hand on her hip and gestured her W towards Izuku. Shinsu is out of bounds. Midoriya wins. Izuku stared down at his former friend as the crowd's cheers echoed around them. He held out a hand for Hitoshi to take, and the boy did so hesitantly. Izuku didn't blame him for that. He pulled the boy in for a hug and whispered, "I'm sorry, Hito-kun," before he let go and walked off, not even allowing Hitoshi time to reciprocate said hug, time to process anything that had just occurred, or time to even think about using his quirk on Izuku. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned around and looked up to see Hitoshi. "Aizu, I dash." The boy's expression softened slightly, and there was a gleam of concern in his eye. "You're not crying. I was just trying to get you to speak. I didn't mean dash." He decided that it was finally time to dignify Hayoshi's words with a response. It's fine, Hito-kun. W both can know you'll be better off W without me." That's exactly I did what I did. Hitoshi let go of his shoulder and stepped back a bit, Izuku taking that as his cue to leave. Izuku was absolutely terrified for this next battle. This boy had both fire and ice at his disposal, as if the dreadful flames he produced weren't enough. Sure, the quirk was cool, but Izuku didn't have any good experiences involving fire. Despite that, however, he had to deal with it. He couldn't afford to lose this battle. Izuku stepped onto the stage, two heterochromic eyes staring daggers at him. He took a deep breath as Present Mike began his countdown once again. "Ready? Start!" A wave of ice immediately came rushing at Izuku. He was barely able to get out of the way of it, but another wave of ice followed suit. Izuku wished he had his baton with him once again. Maybe then he'd be able to smash through the ice. But for now all he could was narrowly avoid the barrage of ice coming his way. After a while, Izuku noticed the other boy was slowing down, his attacks much less frequent than they were at the start. He looked closer and saw that Todoroki was covered in frost, shivering because of it. He knew that the boy could just melt it all off and easily raise his body temperature using his fire, so why was he suffering like this for no reason? He must know you're quirkless, dumbass. Why else would he handicap himself? He knows how FING weak you are. Izuku frowned and ran at Todoroki, who sent another barrage of ice his way. It didn't come at him very quick though, so Izuku easily avoided being hit with it. He grasped Todoroki by his frost-covered arms so the boy couldn't freeze him and went to flip him over the boundary line. Todoroki could have easily just used his fire to stop Izuku. Todoroki is out of bounds. Midoriya wins. But he didn't. Izuku didn't get it. He didn't understand why the boy wouldn't use Izuku's quirklessness to his advantage, if anything. He could have beaten Izuku so easily, yet he restricted himself to his ice only and caused himself to lose the battle in the process. Maybe Izuku should be appreciative? That Todoroki even bothered to handicap himself in the first place? No, that just made Izuku feel even worse, being glad that somebody had purposefully not used their full power for Izuku's sake. Maybe he should be angry? No, that was wrong too. It was Todoroki's decision to do whatever he wanted with his quirk, not Izuku's. Maybe he should be sad? No, that didn't make any sense either. Izuku couldn't make any sense of how he was meant to feel about this. He didn't understand. Shouldn't he understand though? He should understand these things. Izuku caught a glimpse of somebody walking ahead of him now. Somebody with white and red hair, split perfectly down the middle. Todoroki. Before he could even think, he ran up to the boy and tapped his shoulder. Todoroki turned around with a stern expression, which made Izuku realize he had made a mistake, but before he could stop himself he cried, "Why did you handicap yourself be because I'm quirkless, to Todoroki-kun? Why didn't you just use your fire?" Todoroki narrowed his eyes. He seemed to contemplate something for a moment before he spoke. "Let's go somewhere more private." Izuku wished he was wearing one of his hoodies as he stared up at Todoroki, who was leaning against the opposite wall. Then he could pull the drawstrings so tight that the bicolored boy wouldn't be able to give him that glare. Yet he was simply in the school's P uniform, the only alteration being a long-sleeved shirt underneath to hide his scars. So all he could do was fiddle with his fingers as Todoroki began to talk. "I shouldn't really be telling you this, but I just had an argument with my old man and I need to get this out. You wanted an explanation, so you seemed like a good choice. You just can't go around telling this to people, alright?" Izuku nodded. "Okay. Good." The boy took a deep breath. "Have you heard of quirk marriages?" Another nod. Izuku already didn't like where this was going, My father has spent his entire life trying to surpass All Might. Even though he's still attempting to do so, he came up with a backup plan. Using his wealth and fame, my BSTRD of a father managed to get my mother's family to sell her to him, all to get his hands on her quirk. He wished to create the perfect combination of them. A child who had the perfect blend of both fire and ice. My mother had 3 other children before finally having me. I was deemed the masterpiece. I'm no more than a tool for that flaming pile of trash, and he didn't treat my mother any better. He pushed her to her breaking point. She became paranoid, and once thought that I was him, the same night when she poured boiling hot water over my left eye. Izuku's eyes widened in his horror. He knew the number 2 was definitely not the best person by any means, but he wasn't expecting this. Something told him this wasn't even all of it. In short, not using my left side against you was like revenge against him. The brief PRD in which I used it during the cavalry battle was a mistake. I'm going to become a hero, without having to use that BSTRD's quirk. But to Todoroki-kun, it's not H's quirk. Speak up, Midoriya, I can't dash. It's your power. Not his, not anybody else's. It always has been and it always will be, and no matter what that BC says. You decide what you want to become. Izuku yelled, before slapping a hand over his mouth, mumbling, I'm sorry for why yelling, Todoroki-kun? Todoroki shook his head, before a smile, however small, crept onto his face. No. It's all right. Actually reminded me of something my mother told me once. I really needed that. Thank you, Midoriya. Why you're welcome, Todoroki-kun. You all know the drill by now. But it's the semifinals. Izuku Midoriya versus Tenya Ida. Who will be victorious? Let's find out. Ready, ai. Start. Izuku recognized Ida from the cavalry battle, which meant he knew exactly what to expect from him. It didn't mean that Izuku found it any easier to dodge the boy. It was the 3rd time today that he wished he'd brought his baton with him. Sure, he shouldn't want to bash other kids his age over the head with a metal stick, but it was the only weapon he knew how to use. Izuku couldn't outrun the boy, so he was stuck with the same strategy he had performed during his fight against Todoroki, dodging a whole bunch. After a while, the boy must have gotten sick of Izuku constantly dodging him, because he activated the move he had used during the cavalry battle. However, Izuku used Ida's own speed against him. Currently being at the edge of the stage, all Izuku had to do was quickly sidestep out of Ida's way just before he made contact with Izuku, causing him to accidentally run off the stage. Ida is out of bounds. Midoriya wins. Izuku felt a little bit bad for tricking the boy, given the fact that he was a Hero Corps student and not one of the criminals he'd fight on a nightly basis, but if he couldn't use his baton skills, that was the only part of his vigilante skill set he could use against Ida, other than dodging. Katsuki couldn't exactly say he was excited when he walked up to the stage. He was glad that he could get revenge on Deku for making a fool out of him in the first round, but he was more sad at the boy than anything. He disappears for 5 years, suddenly saves him from a villain, completely ignores him on a rooftop and then runs off with some hobo, and now he was at UA, in the finals of the DMN Sports Festival? He didn't get Deku's deal at all, but he was going to force the truth out of him now that the smaller boy had nowhere to run. As he stared the boy down, he frowned. The boy was shaking on and off, he was as pale as a ghost, and a few drops of something dripped from his clenched hands. He'd question him about whatever the hell that was later, but he had more important questions to ask Deku first. At last it's here. The best of the best among UA's first. Years will be decided, right here, right now. It's the final match of the UA Sports Festival. Midoriya versus Bakugo. Their loud but English teacher screamed into his namesake. As the living surround sound speaker counted down, Deku somehow got even paler and Katsuki's frown only deepened. Start! Deku looked lost, eyes wide and form frozen, seeming to not hear Mike. Whatever, it'll make it easier to teach him a lesson. When he inevitably loses, he'll have to give me some goddamn answers. Katsuki snarled and launched forward to Deku, who gasped harshly and stepped back, covering his face and chest with his hands. Katsuki was finally close enough to read his expression, and it was pure, unbridled panic. He didn't even seem to realize Katsuki had stopped, just backing up with shallow, panicked breaths. Midoriya is out of bounds. Bakugo wins. Wait, what? Oi, nerd, you didn't even let me win, did you? 'Cause I think we have a problem if you did. Deku opened his mouth for a second, then closed it and sprinted away, still pale and shaking. Katsuki looked down and saw blood decorating the concrete below him. Izuku's footsteps echoed through the halls of UA, along with his labored breaths. He had been running for who knows long, and after the absolute nightmare of a day the sports festival had been, he was prepared to just collapse on the spot. He should have been able to face Kaken. He shouldn't have been as terrified as he was. Even if Kaken killed him in that battle, it wouldn't have mattered. Izuku was either going to get taken away or have jumped off that apartment building, depending on if Razor managed to catch him. But Izuku still just couldn't bring himself to fight the superior boy. And Kaken would have won either way. Izuku would never be strong enough to beat Kaken. Izuku slid down the wall and put his head in his hands, holding onto his curls for dear life. He didn't know how long he was there for, just sobbing and shaking as Kaken screamed at him in his mind, but Izuku heard a voice calling his name down the hall. Hey Aizu. They're looking for you. They're doing the award ceremony right now and, are you alright? Izuku didn't reply, and Hitoshi crouched down to his level. Hey, Aizu, look at me. Izuku still kept his eyes trained on the ground. Aizu, can you hear me? When Izuku still didn't respond, Hitoshi reached for his hands to try and pull them away from his curls, most likely noticing how hard he was pulling. Izuku slapped the boy's hand away and turned before scooting backwards, frantically attempting to put a bit of distance between them. Hito-kun, he sleepily stared up at the boy who sighed. Sorry Aizu. I shouldn't have done that. That's another thing to add to the list of stuff I've screwed up today. Hitoshi let out a hollow laugh as Izuku shakily stood up. Izuku suddenly wrapped his arms round Hitoshi's torso. Why didn't SC screw anything you up? I just see can't be FR friends with you Hito-kun. And wanting T to be FR friends is really selfish of me. Boo, but I see can't help being selfish. I hate that I see can't help being so DDMN selfish. It's not selfish to want friends, Aizu. If it was, I'd be the most selfish person in the world. Izuku let Hitoshi go and looked up at him, seeing the concerned glint in his eyes once again. He knew the other boy would probably be even more concerned if he knew why Izuku classed wanting friends as selfish. If you want to be friends again, that's fine. Just maybe don't suddenly tell me you longer want to be friends in front of my classmates after avoiding me for a week. Hitoshi gave him a smirk and Izuku realized he was joking. Yeah. So sorry about that, by the way. I've barely talked to you, yet I can tell that you apologize way too much. Hito-kun. I'm is just being respectful and am making sure I didn't offend you. Well, thanks for that. But you don't have to apologize for every little thing. Anyway, you have to get to the awards ceremony, remember? Oh, alright. Thank you, Hito-kun. You're welcome, Aizu. Now, let's move on to the awards ceremony. Midnight announced to the crowd, who went wild once again. In third place, we had both Tokoyami and Ida, but Ida was forced to leave early due to a family emergency, so he shall receive his award later on. Now, for the medals. Presenting them this year is everyone's favorite hero, All Might. She cheered as the man landed in the stadium. He had been saying something of his own, but she had cut him off, which she quickly apologized for. Izuku grimaced as the man walked up to Tokoyami, bronze medal in hand. Congratulations, young Tokoyami. You are a strong one. The bird-headed boy murmured something about the man honoring him too highly, but relying on your quirk alone won't be enough to overcome a bad matchup. Hone your innate strength to open a world of opportunity. All Might advised before beginning to approach Izuku. He wished the number one hero would just ignore him completely and move on to Kaken, but Izuku had no such luck. Young Midoriya, well done for getting as far as you did. Despite being a part of general studies, you managed to show up practically the entire hero course. Izuku knew he should be glad that he was getting praised by the All Might, but the man was yelling in his ear. However, You must rely less on those body slams you've been performing and more on your quirk, whatever it may be. That will help you leaps and bounds. At least the man didn't remember Izuku. He slipped the silver medal over the boy's head before making his way over to Kaken, Izuku breathing a sigh of relief. The blonde was surprisingly calm. Izuku was honestly expecting him to be much more sad due to Izuku running away before they could even begin their battle, but that didn't seem to be the case. All he was doing was giving the number one hero a death stare. Why young Bakugo? In a world that's constantly graded on a curve, there aren't many who can continuously be on top. So accept this medal as proof that you are one of those few. All Might practically had to force the medal over Kaken's head. Izuku may have misjudged Kaken's feelings about all this. He wasn't being openly angry, but just the passive aggressiveness he was showing towards All Might was enough of a red flag. Well, these are your dash. All Might continued to talk, but Izuku tuned the man out. He couldn't take any more of his yelling. He assumed he did some sort of cheer, because the stadium erupted in roars afterwards, though they were complaining about All Might not using the phrase, plus ultra, the motto of U.High. Izuku couldn't wait to just go home, having put the heavy silver medal in his backpack to avoid attention being drawn to him, but while he was walking through Yu'ei's halls yet again, he heard a voice over the intercom. Please may Izuku Midoriya report to Principal Nizu's office. Izuku's heart dropped. Did Principal Nizu finally realize how worthless he is after his shameful display during his battle against Kaken? That would only make sense. Izuku was just a burden on UA. Some people were against just the rule of quirkless people being allowed to go to UA. If they found out one actually got accepted, what would they think then? He'd probably end up destroying UA's reputation single-handedly. Maybe it was a good thing that he was being expelled. Our Razor? He whispered as he saw the man waiting for him outside of the Chimera's office. Just call me Aizawa. And you are. The man knew full well who he was, but Izuku guessed it would be disrespectful to not introduce himself as well. Him Kismi Midoriya, alias Rabbit. And I nice to of officially meet Waiu Aizo-sensei.